Deep night embraced the world with a thick blanket of darkness, and everything around was drowned in silence. The silvery moon shone majestically in the velvet sky, surrounded by a scattering of stars, like jewels on the crown of the heavenly queen of peace, sleep, and silence. The grasses danced under the touch of a light, cool wind, whispering in their mysterious language. In this graceful tremor one could feel a crystal freshness, pure and alive, as if nature itself was revealing its soul in the fragrant silence of the night and complete peace. A woman with jet-black hair stood opposite a blond man with aristocratic features, and looking him straight in the eye, asked if he was the nobleman named Garcia, and if not, then who was he really in this dark and confusing story? The lady was enchantingly beautiful. Her hair was dark as the midnight sky without a moon, her eyes sparkled like green emeralds, and her long, thick eyelashes, casting a shadow, created the feeling that her gaze penetrated into the very soul and left an invisible trace there. The nobleman answered her coldly and distantly that she must have made a mistake, for he was not at all the man she had taken him for. His cold blue eyes and impeccable black tailcoat emphasized his aristocracy, and his fair hair was neatly combed back. Suddenly, the young beauty, all in doubt and tension, realized something strange. It was as if a feeling of déjà vu had visited her, because in this scene and in his gaze there was something frighteningly familiar. She thought about it and hesitantly put her hand to her chin. That was why, with a slight tremor in her voice and a wary grace, she took a step forward, approached the man, and slightly bowing her head, asked if it was possible that his name was actually Louis, a name that sounded all too familiar. The young man only smiled slightly in response, and this light, almost insolent smile touched his graceful lips, illuminating his handsome features as if the rays of the setting sun touched marble. Something meaningful and dangerous flashed in his gaze. The noblewoman froze in place, as if time itself had stopped for a moment in her body. She could not understand why he suddenly smiled so mysteriously. Her mouth involuntarily opened in amazement, and her eyes opened wide in silent and anxious surprise. The man, placing his palm on his chest with a gesture full of dignity, noble grace, and icy calm, finally pronounced his name, Enrique Sullivan. And in these words, framed by the silence of the night and the starlight, there was something disturbingly beautiful, detached and truly cold. The aristocrat's whole body shuddered when the truth finally dawned on her. The young man in front of her was none other than Enrique Sullivan, about whom so many rumors and dark speculations had circulated. A mixture of shock, fear, excitement, and admiration played in her eyes, but she quickly laughed it off with a strained smile. It turned out that all three men, whom she had previously met in different circumstances and in different moods, had a strikingly similar appearance, but were completely different in character, actions, and even in their outlook on the world. How is this possible? Nodding confidently to herself, clenching her fingers as if strengthening her resolve, the beauty firmly and without a doubt said that Enrique Sullivan was openly lying to her, and in his speech there was something feigned, pretentious, as if he was hiding an important part of the truth. The boy had a subtle yet distinct difference, a thin, old scar under his left eye, barely visible in the moonlight, which could give away his true identity, especially for those who had seen this man in another life, under another mask. Suddenly, abruptly and without warning, he turned away from her, not looking her in the eye, and said with cold weariness in his voice that she was wasting his precious time. The girl's left eyebrow twitched. She was not going to let him go like this, without an explanation. Resolutely and almost instinctively, she came closer, grabbed his hand with unexpected strength and persistence, as if she were holding not only his body, but also the truth, and demanded that he not leave, that he stay for a moment longer, and simply hear her out to the end. Enrique Sullivan abruptly and coldly pulled his hand from her grasp, leaving no doubt about his intention to leave, and at that moment the noblewoman, stunned and confused, plunged into thought. It was unlikely that he could have two twin brothers, since such a coincidence seemed almost impossible. There was too much about him that spoke of deception, and the more she recalled the details of their meetings, the stronger the feeling grew that he was either carefully hiding the truth or was suffering from multiple personality, in which each appearance lived its own secret and alien life. To understand how this mystery began, one had to go back in time, to that very day when a young noblewoman with a small suitcase in her hand walked along the road among a dense and slowly moving crowd of other nobles, the same as she, lonely and hopeful. When someone asked her what her name was, the girl, with her eyes slightly lowered, answered very modestly, almost in a whisper, that her name was simply Monica, a name that she bore not by birthright, but because it was once given to her with care. The woman who gave her this name was a strict but fair elderly headmistress of the orphanage. She sat in her usual workplace at a massive dark wooden desk and raised children like Orphan with patience, strictness, and rare warmth. The name Monica was once the name of a famous princess, a woman of royal blood dressed in jewels and magnificent dresses, and who carried her destiny with grandeur. It contained echoes of power, beauty, tragedy, and a sad tale. The little girl adored this name, as if it itself protected her from pain, because it belonged to a real aristocrat, strong and noble. Monica enthusiastically reread old books in which the heroines bore similar, sonorous, and proud names. But whenever she mentioned that, despite her sonorous name, she was a simple orphan without a family or surname, adults, even the kindest ones, sadly covered their mouths with their hands, sighed, and often turned away from her in awkward silence. One day, when Monica quietly entered the office to take away the folded blankets, she noticed how the headmistress of the orphanage, clutching a pen in her thin fingers, was quickly writing something on yellow paper, a long list in which, among the strange letters, someone's familiar name slipped through. Then, like lightning in a foggy mind, the little girl suddenly realized that for convenience and orderliness, the headmistress of the orphanage had given all the orphans the same surname, which carried nothing personal in itself, but served only as a temporary label for convenience. In a persuasive, soft but firm tone, the older woman calmly explained that the last name would be changed after adoption anyway, so it really didn't have any special meaning, and ultimately it didn't matter all that much what the first name turned out to be in this case. However, if the child was never accepted into his family, if he remained alone for a long time, then he had to live with this surname for the rest of his life, and this seemed like a difficult and terrible test, like a curse of fate that lasted forever. Monica winced when her name, shrill and insistent, sounded again. The woman sitting opposite her at the table repeated Monica Orphan several times, but the girl did not respond, completely absorbed in thoughts about her unusual alien name. Embarrassed, as if from a deep shame, the sweet lady lowered her head and her face turned a bright, rich red. After all, her name differed from the simple word orphan by only one letter, and this feeling brought her deep pain and inner embarrassment. Monica Orphan explained that she had only arrived in the city in the morning and had not yet fully recovered from the long and tiring journey, because it was an important interview and she was nervous, realizing how important it was to make a good impression. The head maid of the aristocratic family, looking at her with understanding, sighed deeply, because she knew how hard it could be on long trips, and carefully placed a cup of hot tea on the table, hoping to at least relax the girl a little after her tiring journey. Excitedly, a little nervously, the noblewoman clutched the fabric of the blue dress in her hands, feeling her fingers nervously fiddling with it, and her heart still pounding wildly from worry. Her hands trembled in her lap, and her gaze darted around the room, not knowing where to hide her shame. She was not only beautiful, intelligent, but also, of course, an ideal candidate for the role of a tutor who could be hired by any aristocratic family to teach their children, and her dignified appearance and manners could not fail to attract the attention of rich people. The ladies' conversation turned to the fact that Monica had worked as a nurse during the war, and she had a cover letter confirming her experience and qualifications, which added to her confidence in her own value and determination, and also raised her status in the eyes of her interlocutors. Smiling happily, the girl thanked the woman for such a pleasant and sincere compliment, feeling her heart fill with warmth from such words, because it meant recognition of her work and efforts put into such an important and sometimes thankless job. 4 years ago, in the vast kingdom where she grew up, a terrible war began, full of horrors, wounds, and losses, and young Monica, like many others, found herself drawn into this endless nightmare that not only she but the entire great nation had to face. Then, the beautiful Monica orphan, having read that several years of experience and a good salary were required, without hesitation decided to go to the front, realizing that her participation could become her chance not only to help, but also to gain the opportunity to build a better life. Her eyes lit up with hope, because this was her chance to go to university, get an education, and after the war become a sought-after specialist with state support for the military. And this thought became for her a spark of confidence in the future that she so wanted to build. The infirmary, where the nurses carried out their duties with full dedication, was filled with soft light reflecting off the walls and medical equipment, creating an atmosphere of calm but intense bustle that reigned in this room, where each day brought new challenges. When she was given a nurse's uniform, Monica took on the new challenge with determination, realizing that this was her only chance to start a new life, despite all the obstacles she encountered along the way, and especially since she was ready for hard work. But unfortunately, everything she dreamed of, going to university and having the opportunity to study, was destroyed by the horrors of war, when all her hopes and dreams were erased, and the payment of wages for professional work never took place. When Monica was already 22 years old, she received a letter from another military nurse with a recommendation that, despite her difficult situation, opened a new path for her. This letter became her chance, which allowed her to become a maid in a prestigious house. The city she arrived in was vast and majestic, with stately buildings and luxurious aristocratic mansions that exuded an atmosphere of wealth and power, causing her to feel a mixture of admiration and fear of this new world. It was more like a nanny's job than a tutor's, and the girl spent her days sitting with the children, caring for them, playing with toys and teaching them, devoting her energy and attention to the children's world, which was new to her, but at the same time warm. The head maid, with readiness and calmness, explained that tomorrow she would introduce Monica to the head of the family, and after that the girl would be able to immediately begin her duties as a full-fledged part of this cozy but strict house where a new role awaited her. Monica Orphan flinched when the maid, her future colleague, approached her and said with a slight wariness that she had one important question that she wanted to ask, and this question suddenly made the girl freeze and think. And then the maid, with curiosity and caution, asked if Monica Orphan was an orphan, for her surname, so unusual for many, betrayed her origin, which caused a momentary silence and confusion, which Monica tried to hide behind a calm and imperturbable look. After this, the ladies said goodbye to each other, and the woman, waving goodbye to the younger one, with a kind and gentle expression on her face, left, leaving behind a quiet, almost imperceptible trace in the air, while the latter nodded in response, feeling how everything around her, as if at that moment, became a little clearer. The blue sky, serenely spreading over the horizon, gently enveloped in fluffy clouds, filled the atmosphere with lightness and serenity, as if everything around had frozen, giving everyone a moment of peace and tranquility in which to take a break from worries and bustle. The noblewoman, confidently and with dignity, strode through the crowded, seething crowd, heading forward, holding tightly in her hands her large suitcase, which seemed to conceal not only her entire life, but also many unknown possibilities, anxiously and impatiently awaiting her in the future. Monica Orphan mentally reproached herself for having so naively hoped for a chance to be hired, losing faith in her own strength, although if she had made a more balanced and thoughtful choice, she could have taken a more worthy place in life. But this hasty step became a fatal mistake for her. But she had a chance to become part of an influential and respected family, to acquire a beautiful last name and position, but at that moment, in her young years, she refused this opportunity, deciding that she would never be adopted, that she would not become part of someone else's life, despite all the prospects and benefits. When Monica Orphan was only 12 years old, she already felt deeply how much her heart was squeezed with pity for the little girl who stood next to her, tears rolling down her cheeks, and with difficulty realizing that she would not be adopted, despite all the hopes she had. After the vase broke, the water immediately splashed onto the floor, creating a frightening and unexpected atmosphere in the room, in which everyone present felt the tension spreading all around, and everyone became worried about what was happening, as if danger was in the air. Then the headmistress of the orphanage sharply scolded Lizzie, accusing her of being too careless and reckless a girl who dropped a fragile vase and destroyed it, despite the fact that in fact the little girl was overcome with horror and fear, absolutely unable to control the situation. Monica Orphan watched with concern as her good friend, trembling with fear and shock from what had happened, barely holding back tears, and her heart was breaking with pain because she saw how Lizzie was suffering and afraid, unable to help her in this difficult moment. The orphanage was a large, gray, and dreary building consisting of 2 floors, where a gloomy and depressing atmosphere reigned, and the lifeless walls, like a reflection of the inner emptiness, did not bode well for those who found themselves within its walls, leaving only a feeling of hopelessness. When Monica Orphan was only 12 years old, she already showed extraordinary kindness and sensitivity to other children, always ready to lend a helping hand to those who could not cope with something or did not understand how to complete a task, which made her a particularly valuable and important person for those around her. Sitting down at the table, the girl took the chalk and began to write on the board, teaching the other boys and girls how to read and write correctly. She did this with such patience and attention to each one that all who were present tried to learn her lessons with the utmost attention and diligence. The female teachers often praised Monica for her intelligence and education, as she was already remarkably developed in her early years, making her a true example for the other children in the orphanage, inspiring them to strive for knowledge, self-improvement, and aspirations for a better future. The carriage stopped at the gates of the shelter, and people gathered around it, waiting to see what would happen next, as if on the brink of an important event that was about to begin, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation, as before a decisive moment that would change everything. The people who came to the orphanage to pick up the children were called sponsors. They lined up the children, examining each one with cold scrutiny and appraising them as if they were nothing more than a commodity to be purchased, without regard for their feelings, experiences, or hopes. They generally preferred to take the young children, considering them more suitable for adoption, since the younger ones were easier to handle and easier to create the necessary connections. They were the ones they chose first, not giving a chance to the others who turned out to be older and no longer fit their requirements. At this point, Monica Orphan, despite being 12 years old, already believed that she was too old to be adopted, but she still cherished a tiny hope that someone might notice her among other children and decide to take her into their family, giving her a new chance for the future. Then the man, obviously a wealthy nobleman, in an elegant suit, with a neatly trimmed beard and a confident posture, sat down on a chair and said that he intended to adopt a child, implying that his family needed to be replenished and a prosperous future for one of the orphanage children. After that, he turned to the director sitting opposite, explaining that the child should be about 12 years old because several years ago his wife suffered a tragic miscarriage, and they were trying to make up for this loss, to find a girl who could fill the empty place in their family and become her new joy. After thinking for a moment, the man quietly added that he would like the girl to have dark hair, which, in his opinion, would be a wonderful addition to the image of his future daughter, creating harmony in their family circle and giving her the special charm that they were waiting for. The woman, quietly clapping her hands, confidently announced that she had an excellent option for him that could be suitable, since she had been watching the children in the orphanage for a long time and knew well which of them could ideally fit into his needs and become part of his family. Of the 2 girls she suggested, Monica stood out as someone who had always been well-liked. She was smart and friendly, which made her an ideal candidate for such a family ready for change and care. Lizzie, with a heavy sigh, relayed the news of the upcoming adoption to the girl herself, and her face, filled with instant surprise, quickly changed to a cold emptiness in her eyes when she realized that she was the one who fit the description that the man was looking for, which seemed to darken her thoughts like an invisible shadow. Eyes became glassy and empty as she began to realize that perhaps the man was looking for a girl just like her. It became obvious to her that she could be the one he wanted to adopt, but this fact only made her feelings worse, consuming her soul with doubts and regrets. After this, the girl turned her head to her friend and bitterly noted that she, in fact, was much more suitable for the role of an aristocrat's daughter, somehow veiledly emphasizing the difference in their destinies and social status, as if involuntarily emphasizing that her chances of happiness were much higher. Several days passed and Monica Orphan watched as her partner cried bitterly, pressing her face to her knees, as it became clear that no family wanted to adopt her, leaving her alone, where she felt the weight of hopelessness and the agonizing weight, as if the world had turned its back on her. The dark sky was strewn with bright stars, and the darkness, like an invisible curtain, wrapped around them, creating an atmosphere of mystery and loneliness. And Lizzie, through tears, desperately asked her friend for a great favor. Her wet marks on her cheeks testified to a deep inner experience. Through tears rolling down her cheeks, Lizzie, with bitterness and despair in her voice, turned to her friend with a request for help. Her wet marks on her face only emphasized all the pain that she felt at that moment, being unable to contain her emotions. After this, the little girl, unable to bear the emotional tension any longer, sank to her knees. Her body could not hold up, and she felt how disappointment and fear overwhelmed her, not giving her the strength to get up and continue the fight, as if the whole world was squeezing her to the limit. In a desperate attempt to change her fate, she begged her friend to give her place so that she could be adopted, because she was ready to sacrifice everything in order to gain a chance at a new life and feel the warmth and care of another family where she would be accepted and loved. Monica Orphan sighed uncertainly and said that she had not expected the headmistress to allow her to do this because she had thought that such a thing simply could not happen, and that she could not even imagine that her request would be heard, as if the whole world around her had turned upside down. But Lizzie was persistent. She continued to sob unbearably, repeating that she would somehow leave here if only her friend would refuse the opportunity to be adopted, despite her pain and despair, full of readiness for any sacrifice for the sake of her happiness, although she herself could not overcome the pain of her loss. When the girl asked how all this could happen according to her ideas, her friend answered that she would simply get into the carriage instead of Orphan and go to a new family who would be ready to accept her as their daughter, despite all the obstacles, so that at least one of them would find her dream of a new beginning. Monica Orphan shuddered with genuine surprise when she learned that her friend was ready to give her her brooch, the same elegant and sparkling one that Monica liked so much, because she clearly realized how dear and symbolic this small but significant detail was for their fragile relationship. That piece of jewelry was beautiful, with a pink stone surrounded by gold details, shining in the light like the epitome of luxury and elegance, and it was expensive, making everyone who saw it feel its value and sophistication, like an item that belonged to something great. All the children in the orphanage envied how beautiful the brooch looked when the sun shone on it, and how it sparkled, reflecting delicate pink highlights, attracting all eyes, becoming a symbol of refined taste and high-class style, incredibly standing out among other decorations. Lizzie was always proud of her jewelry, but her pride sometimes turned into something more than just the joy of owning it, because the brooch was her weapon in a world where such things were valued, and she knew it very well, constantly emphasizing her uniqueness. Sitting with a book in her hands, Monica Orphan often envied Lizzie, dreaming of one day having such a brooch that would shine on her chest as a symbol that she too could be a valuable and worthy person, not just another child in an orphanage. In the end, Lizzie decided on a deal. She would sit in the carriage instead of the noble lady and go to a new family, and the little girl left behind would receive that very brooch as modest compensation for her sacrifice, because Lizzie hoped that in this way she could help her friend find a chance for a bright future. Awkwardly, with worry in her eyes, Monica Orphan looked away, wondering if this was truly an equal exchange, if she should agree to such a risky act, since she could not be sure that in return she would receive something more than just a beautiful decoration. Tears, large and heavy, fell onto the floor, pounding like thunder and spreading to the sides, leaving wet marks on the wooden surface like a living embodiment of all the pain and disappointment that filled the hearts of both girls at that moment. Lizzie, shivering from the cold, sobbed, holding back her tears, and said that Monica Orphan was so beautiful and smart that she deserved much better than her own life in the orphanage, while she was scolded every day by the headmistress for minor offenses. Then Lizzie raised her head, her eyes full of tears, and in a trembling voice she called herself a stupid, useless girl who didn't deserve anything good, feeling her own words tearing her apart from the inside, leaving only pain and devastation in her heart. The headmistress did indeed scold poor Lizzie every day, often being cruel and unfair in her harsh remarks, unwilling and perhaps unable to understand that behind her actions there was only despair, fear of loneliness, and a strong desire to be accepted by others. With sadness and pain in her voice, the girl said that no one loved her, and that she always wanted to be like Monica Orphan, as talented, as smart as her friend, who always managed to attract attention and deserve praise, while she remained in the shadows. Looking away, the girl suddenly thought that her friend might have been right in her guess, and that she might actually have a chance at adoption, unlike the other one, who seemed to have no such chance anymore, despite all her previous hopes. And so, at last, she clenched her thoughts into a fist, made a firm, mature decision, and step by step set out on the path of change, in which the new day filled her soul with warmth, and the sky, as if refreshed by the rain, looked clean, clear, and full of good, promising omens. Monica Orphan sat at her desk, lost in thought, as she carefully examined her gift. An expensive, exquisite brooch that had been given to her as a sign of respect, recognition, and deep gratitude from someone important in her life. She was amazingly beautiful. The brooch sparkled in the light, playing with pink shades that seemed to shimmer in every ray of light, as if the thing itself was a living creature in the girl's hands, breathing magic and keeping some secret memories. Suddenly, Monica Orphan stood up abruptly, went to the window and leaned against its cold surface, curiously watching what was happening outside, where life continued its stormy and unknown running, not paying attention to her inner experiences. At this time, when the city was falling asleep under the whisper of the evening wind and the rare light of the street lamps trembled on the wet asphalt, the headmistress hastily searched the streets in the desperate hope of finding Monica in order to hand her over to the care of her new, long-awaiting parents. Suddenly, her tired gaze fell on the slender figure of a girl with lush, golden curly hair, in a neat coat and with a touching smile. It was Lizzie, ready to leave, but unfortunately, it was not at all the Monica she was looking for. Without wasting a second, realizing the full weight and responsibility of the moment, the headmistress with a cold heart resolutely placed Lizzie's palm into the outstretched hand of the silent aristocrat. There was no time left for further searching, and the choice seemed inevitable. The young Monica Orphan herself, hiding behind the window curtain, watched with a sinking, tender heart as Lizzie, wrapped in a woolen cloak, slowly moved away from the shelter in a painted carriage, being taken away forever from this cold and indifferent world. The next minute, the strict headmistress, overcome with rage, unleashed a stream of screams, insults, and pain on Monica, not holding back her emotions, calling her a stupid fool, a useless girl who no one would ever adopt, and adding that she regretted the day they met. The lovely Monica Orphan, all trembling, sat alone on the hard bed with iron springs, feeling an unbearable pain in her legs. On her pale skin, fresh wounds and abrasions from blows of a stick, left by the anger of the one who should have cared for her, were red. So no one adopted young Monica. Time passed, the girl grew up, matured, became stronger, and began working as a nurse in a city clinic, and Lizzie never returned to the old shelter. She found a new, loving family and completely forgot the past. The woman's footsteps sounded loud and firm on the gravel road, leather-clad boots echoing dully in the cool morning air as the lone girl in the blue dress walked confidently forward, carrying with her the heavy images of her past. She thought about how cunning, sly Lizzie had skillfully and ruthlessly manipulated her in those young years, feigning weakness, naivety, and meekness, while in fact she had calculated everything in advance, forcing everyone to act only according to her will and an insidious, carefully thought-out plan. The old maid with her tight gray bun, wearing a cap and a strict apron, with a sharp metallic voice and a frowning look that day made it clear that the child she was to raise was not a girl, but a wayward, stubborn boy with an indomitable character. This boy, as it later became known from a short letter and a few words of the governess, turned out to be the youngest son in a family of respected aristocrats, born many years after the other children, like an unexpected, almost miraculous late gift sent down into the walls of an ancient family. From early childhood, the boy was distinguished by his fragility and sickly constitution. His skin seemed almost as thin as a petal, and his body was weak and vulnerable, so he constantly needed care, affection, and attentive medical attention, because any overwork could cause him a severe fever. The family in which he grew up was indecently rich. Large chests filled with gold coins stood in the basements under guard, and therefore the nanny, governess, and servants were paid generously, but in return they expected unconditional obedience, dedication, and loyal service to the end. Monica, orphan, walking confidently forward along the paved path with a dusty edge, thought about how in that luxurious house even the servants did not dare to get sick, so as not to lose the rare, almost precious opportunity to remain in a reliable, warm, and profitable service. As if by a twist of fate or a random whim of time, she ended up in a dusty, noisy, and bustling seaport where seagulls screamed loudly across the vast sky, and the air was thick with the smells of salt and fuel oil, while the ship rocked, beckoning her on an unknown and distant journey. The hotel was located at a distance from the station, and at the port men worked, transporting heavy bags, unloading cargo, and, conversely, carrying boxes to the ship. They all moved quickly and harmoniously, doing their difficult work amidst the constant chaos and noise of the port. Approaching one of the workers, Monica, orphan, a little confused and embarrassed, tried to clarify in which direction the station was. She sincerely hoped for help, but her question was met only with indifference and rude treatment from the man. The man didn't pay her any attention, only indifferently and rudely pushed her away, as if she were an unremarkable and insignificant creature standing in his way. His cold reaction only increased her feeling of loneliness and helplessness in the noise and haste of the port. Disappointed, the girl walked away and, passing by a seagull, her gaze accidentally met the bird. She suddenly wondered if it was possible that this seagull, soaring freely in the sky, knew where to go, or at least could point out the direction in which the answer awaited her. Far beyond the beautiful horizon, in a village located right by the sea, the roofs of the houses were covered with golden rays of sunlight, and the sky, clear and cloudless, resembled the serenity and tranquility that she so wanted to feel at this moment in her life. As soon as the lady saw the tall tower, her gaze was immediately caught by its impressive outlines, and she involuntarily held her gaze, struck by the grandeur and unusualness of this architectural structure, which attracted her attention with its grandeur and mystery. Then Monica realized that she should be heading in that direction, because the majestic clock tower was right next to the station, and it was the right way, which she might have missed, not noticing an important landmark among the city bustle and people. The beauty turned and began to carefully examine the surrounding area, deciding to find ways to shorten her path as quickly and safely as possible, with the hope that now, knowing the right direction, she would definitely not make a mistake and not get lost in this unfamiliar place. Suddenly Monica, unexpectedly and with obvious surprise, recoiled. Her face darkened, and horror appeared in her eyes when something appeared before her that caused instant alarm and fear, clearly a harbinger of something terrible, like a dark cloud covering a woman's soul. A man suddenly grabbed the girl by the shoulders and pulled her towards him, not giving her the slightest chance to resist. His strength was frightening, but his gaze was strange and cold, as if he saw right through her, which made her feel an icy fear. A strange but handsome man smiled at her. His blonde hair and blue eyes gave him a special charm, and his regular features and mysterious smile created the impression of an aristocrat. A light pantsuit complemented his elegant image. The aristocrat held her by the waist. His hands were confident but not rough, and he gently asked if everything was okay, behaving in a friendly manner with her, as if trying to gain her trust, which alerted the girl and made her feel uncertain and slightly anxious. The beauty, slightly embarrassed and not understanding what he meant, hesitantly asked what exactly he was talking about, not knowing how to properly respond to his casual and mysterious behavior, which caused her mixed feelings and inner anxiety. An uncomfortable silence fell between the couple, a heavy silence that hung between them like an invisible barrier, preventing further conversation and disturbing the calm of this strange moment, making both of them feel awkward and out of place. Suddenly, the lady remembered that she had seen this guy before, back in the war, when he was brought to the hospital with a piece of shrapnel in his eye. His head was wrapped in bandages, and he seemed lost, but despite his vulnerability, he maintained amazing resilience, not allowing himself to break as if he were invulnerable. On the badge attached to his uniform was written the name Saul. He was a colonel, but the girl never learned his full name, since at that moment everyone was too busy treating the wounded, and there was no time even for such trifles as fully getting to know the patients. Monica was sitting on the bed, and another nurse, her colleague, asked how her patient was, worried about the condition of the injured man, while she herself had long been accustomed to such situations, sometimes losing all sense of anxiety and emotional involvement in what was happening. The man was badly wounded, but despite this, his face remained amazingly handsome. His features were clear, his skin was light, almost white, and his hair was the color of sunlight. The bandages applied to the wounds could not hide his expressive appearance and strong character. Monica looked after the patient for several months when he lay unconscious for a long time, and her care became the only salvation in this hopeless situation. She prayed and hoped that someday a miracle would still happen, despite all the doubts and fears. The doctors were about to give up, ready to abandon the patient, claiming that his death was inevitable and only a miracle could change the situation. But suddenly, something happened that no one expected. Sol suddenly woke up, and everyone felt incredible hope. Monica was incredibly happy, her heart filled with gratitude and hope when she saw him begin to move on the bed, realizing that her efforts were not in vain. And he came back to life again, despite all the worries and anxieties she experienced. But the joy was short-lived, as their kingdom soon suffered a crushing defeat, and the green flag was lowered, leading to destruction and terrible chaos that engulfed everything around, leaving only devastation, darkness, and a complete sense of hopelessness. The patients' rooms were empty, because all the wounded had been taken back to the war to continue fighting, and the hospital remained almost empty, creating a feeling of loneliness and silence in these walls, where there had previously been so many people, and where there was eternal noise. Worried, Monica bowed her head, thinking and hoping that her patient, whom she had cared for so long, would be okay, and that his recovery would really bear fruit, despite all the difficulties she had gone through with him. Even though the man didn't say a word, the lovely girl continued to look after him, often spoon-feeding him, helping him with everything despite the silence, and continued to take care of him with great hope that her efforts would not go unnoticed and that he would appreciate her love. She changed the bandages and dressings when the time came for a new dressing, and each time her care for him was tireless, despite his silence and lack of obvious reaction to her actions, which greatly upset her, making her doubt her feelings. A joyful Monica, with pride and satisfaction in her eyes, watched the recovery of the boy she had christened Saul, and, imagining him getting back on his feet, she placed her hand on her chest, as if paying tribute to his courage and fortitude. The happy beauty, as if at the moment of her great triumph, began to confidently say that she considered him already completely healthy and whole, not noticing how the young man, with obvious surprise, recoiled from her, struck by her words and not expecting such a turn of events. After which the adult man's face, which had initially expressed confusion and awkwardness, gradually changed, and he tried to answer with a slight smile, confused in his feelings and completely not understanding how to react to her confidence in his imminent recovery. The man, a little embarrassed, answered her with difficulty that he had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, and the lovely lady, shocked by his reaction, recoiled, unable to comprehend how this was possible because she had been so confident in her perception of the situation, and her confidence began to gradually melt away. The older man added that his name was not Saul at all, but something completely different, and this revelation surprised the beautiful girl, making her realize that she must have been mistaken, although the memory of the wounded patient from the war continued to torment her thoughts, giving her no peace. However, his current appearance strongly resembled that same patient from the war whose face was hidden by bandages, and despite the changes in clothing and appearance, memories of that time washed over Monica like a wave, making her feel something familiar and disturbing. Then, of course, he did not wear such beautiful clothes as he does now, but his face remained just as clean and good, without the slightest trace of change, without a beard, as in those distant days when she first saw him, with bandages on his head, and with that expression that she could not forget. Monica Orphan, with slight embarrassment, hastened to apologize, realizing that she had made a mistake and had taken this young man for someone else, completely not expecting such an unexpected meeting, which once again reminded her of her inability to accurately assess the situation. The guy, with a slight smile and a calm look, replied that everything was fine, assuring her that he was not offended by her misunderstanding, and added that his posture was always impeccable, like that of a true Southern gentleman, and he was brought up in strict traditions. While Monica continued to worry, Louis, with a soft and calm voice, introduced himself to her, thereby dispelling her doubts, and she realized that he really looked very similar to her friend, which made her confused and make the wrong assumption. Young Monica Orphan, slightly embarrassed by her loud behavior, hastily apologized, realizing that she had made a mistake. At that moment, while she was still trying to justify herself, a carriage appeared next to her, and the coachman loudly shouted for her to immediately clear the way. The young man, noticing her confusion and seeing how she froze in place, quickly approached and, without thinking, grabbed her hand, gently and confidently pulling it to the side, trying to protect her from a possible threat, because at such moments it is difficult to predict what might happen. Suddenly, one of the large suitcases, unable to withstand such weight and the daring shaking of the cart, breaks loose and falls to the ground with a crash, attracting everyone's attention and adding even more tension to the already difficult atmosphere of what was happening. Louis, instantly realizing the danger, without thinking and without the slightest hesitation, stood between the girl and the possible threat, covering her with himself like a true knight, and, as if in slow motion, the carriage rushed past. At that moment the suitcase fell with a crash next to them. Monica Orphan, completely stunned by what had happened, stood in his arms, feeling how his arms, strong and protective, wrapped around her, bringing a feeling of safety and confidence. Everything around her, including her thoughts, seemed to stop, and she herself froze in the shadow of his protection. After the carriage finally passed by, Louis, looking at her with concern, asked with slight anxiety if everything was all right, as if expecting an answer. But Monica, embarrassed by such close contact, could not utter a word, only froze, not knowing what to do. When Monica finally realized how close she was to young Louis, her fragile heart skipped a beat, and her soul was seized by an incomprehensible fear, as if she was on the verge of something important, and the next second she instinctively recoiled, as if trying to hide from his attention. Hearing the man's polite question, Monica, still slightly confused and not fully recovered from her recent excitement, with quiet uncertainty and a slight trepidation in her voice, said that she was heading to the station when she unexpectedly ran into him on this street corner. With his arms outstretched in a welcoming gesture, Louis, with exquisite courtesy, offered to accompany her to the Silver Square, fully understanding that in such a bustling, noisy, and unfriendly city, it is important to feel safe, especially in the company of a decent and reliable companion. Silver Square, as it was affectionately called by locals, was not just a picturesque corner of the capital. It was crowned by majestic towers and houses with carved facades, rising proudly, as if guarding the city and giving it an aura of calm grandeur and history. The man's hand, strong and reliable, as if created to protect, confidently grabbed the handle of the suitcase and lifted it with ease, demonstrating his readiness to take on any weight, and, without losing his goodwill, he continued on his way next to the lady, radiating warmth and attention. That's how they met. Monica, a little nervous, still found the courage to introduce herself, giving her name, and soon the two of them headed towards the station, step by step immersing themselves in a casual conversation and gaining a feeling of unexpected but pleasant closeness. Louis, remaining reserved and tactful, did not go into details of his story, mentioning only that he grew up not far from the capital and arrived in the city with an important goal for him: to find people from the past with whom he once had a lot in common, but the connection was broken over time. Monica, noticing a certain quiet sadness in his voice, involuntarily smiled, feeling how easy and calm it was for her to be next to this man, as if there was already an invisible understanding between them, and succumbing to this feeling, she almost decided to tell him why she ended up in the city. Having listened to her with sincere attention, Louis suddenly noticed that the profession of a tutor, chosen by her, seemed to be created just for her. So smart, patient, and kind did she seem to him, and Monica, hearing this, shuddered in surprise, not expecting such words. He ran his fingers softly and with gentle care down her cheek, tucking an unruly strand of hair behind her ear, and in this gesture there was not only politeness, but also something personal, almost intimate, something that made Monica look down and feel slightly embarrassed, feeling her heart beat faster. With a light, charming smile, Louis, as if by chance, said that he had never met such a charming girl with such expressive eyes that seemed to be able to speak without words. It was a sincere compliment that sounded unexpectedly, but warmly. She looked down, hiding an embarrassed smile, and her fingers nervously slid along the handle of her bag, as if searching for support in it, because Louis's words, so unexpectedly warm and frank, touched something long forgotten in her, a childhood dream of being someone important to someone else. A light, almost imperceptible flirtation arose between them. Louis's words were playful, fueled by genuine sympathy, and he added with a slight grin that, perhaps of all the ladies he had ever met, Monica was the most curious and unusual. This slightly embarrassed the young beauty. She admitted that she had never been to the capital before and had no idea how to behave here, to which the man, with a slight smile and slight evasion, replied that in this city you can find a lot of interesting things and there is no need to worry about these little things. The asphalt echoed loudly under the heels of her boots, reflecting her steps as they walked leisurely along the pavement, surrounded by majestic architecture, houses with facades, fountains with exquisite statues, and everything around seemed alive, as if in the rays of the midday sun every corner of this capital was filled with energy. Silver Square appeared before them in all its glory, like an old postcard, full of comfort and grandeur, and when the young couple finally reached the right place, the guy, smiling slightly, said that he had fulfilled his mission and happily brought it to its goal. Finally, the couple arrived at their destination, and both of them, the lady in the light dress and the young guy with disheveled hair, hurried along the cobbled path, smiling as if this moment was the beginning of something special. Monica thanked the young man for his care and attention, to which he, bowing slightly in a truly gentlemanly manner, with sincere warmth in his voice, replied that it was not at all difficult, because from the very beginning he sincerely wanted to help her and make this moment pleasant for her. There was something truly attractive about this young nobleman. His refined features, blonde hair, and warm, sincere smile resembled a fragrant rosebud that had blossomed in the very center of the stony and soulless bustle of the capital, giving everything around him a special atmosphere. Suddenly Louis spoke, expressing hope that he would definitely have a chance to meet this girl again, and his words sounded like a quiet promise, as if fate itself was preparing another crossed path for them in the future, where they could be together. The man's hand tightly grasped the woman's, their fingers intertwined in a mysterious unity, as if he was trying to hold her not only in the physical plane, but also in a deep, invisible space, giving a feeling of peace and confidence at this moment. Then, leaning forward slightly, he gave her hand a kiss, his lips touching her soft skin with incredible softness, and his posture, leaning over her, radiated respect and tenderness, which certainly embarrassed Monica and made her heart beat faster. After that, continuing to hold her hand, he said that now he would definitely remember her, and she, in turn, would remember him as the one who left an indelible mark on her life, and this moment, without any doubt, would forever remain in her heart as a precious memory. Monica's whole body shuddered, realizing that Louis turned out to be a real heartthrob, whose actions made her feel excited and confused, as if her feelings had suddenly become a toy in his deft and experienced hands, and she could not understand what was happening between them. After his beautiful words and elegant gestures saying goodbye to her, there came a moment of disappointment when it seemed that all her hopes had collapsed, and she could not understand what was really happening between them, questioning her feelings, thoughts, and her own perception. The lady watched him closely until his figure disappeared into the distance, and as she watched his retreating back, she realized that her thoughts were beginning to get confused, as if his image could not leave her consciousness, leaving in her soul a deep, inexplicable, and mystical mystery that did not give her peace. After that, she slowly turned around and walked away, turning away from the carriage, because his playful behavior left her with a strange and vague feeling, as if all the desire to meet him again had disappeared in an instant, leaving no trace in her heart. Finally, after a long and tiring day, Monica, no longer able to stand on her feet, reached the living room and, barely holding back her weakness, fell exhausted onto the bed, allowing her body to completely relax because the fatigue that had accumulated over the entire tense day was already unbearable. The resort she arrived at was truly delightful, a warm sea, majestic ships sailing off into the distance on the horizon, and fresh, salty air that filled the lungs, creating an atmosphere of absolute peace and calm harmony. Louis was undoubtedly an incredibly attractive man, and his image was almost impossible to forget. His blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and truly mesmerizing appearance left an indelible impression on her heart that never left her. Quickly, sweet Monica shook her head, reminding herself that she should have forgotten that young man. He was not her patient, and their meeting had no continuation, despite the fact that he left such a vivid trace in her memory that it continued to haunt her and prevent her from concentrating. She sat up on the huge bed and, having collected her thoughts, decided that it was time to prepare for tomorrow, to have time to do everything, and then rest a little, filling herself with new energy for the upcoming events and all those surprises that could await her. The next morning was a cloudless blue sky, and a gentle breeze touched her hair, bringing a feeling of freshness despite the hot sun that promised to create a sultry day full of new challenges and tests that she needed to be prepared for. Monica walked along the beach where the hot sand pleasantly warmed her feet, and the sun's rays, like merciless arrows, burned her skin. She covered her forehead and eyes with her hand, trying to see better where to go, heading towards the mansion, where important work and new responsibilities awaited her, requiring her attention. Raising her head sharply, Monica suddenly realized that she should buy herself a hat to at least somehow protect herself from the scorching sun, which was becoming brighter and hotter with each passing moment, and her skin was already feeling this unbearable heat, requiring immediate protection. She had only an old winter hat, worn out by time and too warm for such a hot day, but despite this, she continued to wear it, because she could not afford to update her wardrobe, although this desire became more and more insistent every day. As soon as she received her next paycheck, Monica decided that the first thing she would do would be to buy herself a summer hat with a large brim, which would not only protect her from the hot sun, but would also add lightness to her image, turning her every step into an elegant and carefree movement in the hot season. An elegant noblewoman with a white umbrella passed by her, and Monica could not help but notice her beauty and sophistication. The girl turned around, and her open mouth became a reflection of her admiration, as she sincerely envied her ability to protect herself from the heat so elegantly. The lady smiled, thinking that perhaps she should first buy something more useful, like an umbrella, a hat, or a handbag, anything that could help her stay comfortable on such a hot day, while adding lightness and elegance to her look without compromising her style. The noble's mansion was huge and rich, with tall columns that rose majestically in front of the entrance, and light staircases that went up, as if inviting one to enter a world of luxury and refined beauty, where every corner was filled with an atmosphere of grandeur. A cup of iced tea sat on the table, bringing a pleasant refreshment to this hot day. Its coolness was so welcome in the midst of the summer heat that every sip gave a feeling of true salvation, giving relief and lightness that are so necessary in such moments. The lady sitting at the table, with a kind smile, offered her guest to enjoy a cup of tea, inviting her to share a moment of peace and comfort, as if this gesture were not only a sign of hospitality, but also an invitation to a quiet, leisurely conversation, giving rest in the heart of the city. With joy and gratitude, Monica accepted the offer, her eyes shining with happiness as she took the first sip of cool tea, which, like a light breeze, brought with it long-awaited refreshment on this hot day, filling her soul with peace and light delight. She took another sip, carefully tasting the taste of this drink, which was not only refreshing but also aromatic, immersing her in an atmosphere of peace, as if helping to forget all the worries and stress that had accumulated during the day, filling her heart with a feeling of harmony. Monica, having rested and relaxed a bit, admitted that she was amazed by the grandeur of the capital, its dynamic atmosphere and unique architecture, to which the noblewoman sitting opposite agreed with a slight smile, adding that this city always knows how to surprise, revealing its secrets. After that, the graceful hands of the aristocrat carefully placed the cup of tea on the table, and the quiet sound of her touch barely disturbed the silence of the room, adding harmony and peace, creating an atmosphere in which everything, from movements to details, was perfectly balanced. The aristocrat, leaning slightly forward and placing her hands on her chest, with a sincere expression on her face, said that she had recently hired a nanny for her second baby, whose name was Martinel, a good and calm boy, but with weakened health, requiring special attention. Monica noted to herself that, despite her high position, this beautiful woman was a sincerely loving and caring mother, and her kindness, as well as gentleness in her manners, revealed a warm soul hidden behind the external aristocratic appearance. The girls introduced themselves to each other and began to get to know each other, exchanging short phrases and light smiles, enjoying the moment, sitting at the table, drinking tea and chatting, gradually immersing themselves in an atmosphere of trust, mutual respect, and easy, relaxed conversation. After this, Monica, sitting opposite the aristocrat, said with a slight smile that she was 22 years old, and, pronouncing these words, she felt a slight excitement, realizing that at her age many women were already married, which gave her statement a certain subtlety. The noblewoman, having listened with keen interest to Monica's words, gently remarked that she was just the same age as her eldest daughter, and this thought immediately attracted her attention, making the conversation even warmer and more personal, filling the room with an atmosphere of goodwill and mutual respect. The aristocrat's eldest daughter was named Liella. She was a refined lady with soft curly hair, always elegantly dressed and wearing a stylish hat, although despite her age, she was still not married, which, according to many, was quite unusual for her circle. Waving her hand, the noblewoman with a slight smile told her interlocutor that her daughter did not want to get married, but would prefer to stay with her mother in the family forever, not wanting changes in her life, which for her was more important than anything else in the world. Interested, the aristocrat, raising her eyebrows, asked if this meant that Monica was not going to get married either, which, in her opinion, was quite curious and even a little unusual for a woman of her age in such society. With a sigh, Monica quietly replied that she had no mother and was left an orphan, which significantly changed her perception of relationships and life in general, as she always preferred to be independent and not depend on other people. The woman quickly apologized, realizing that her words could have been taken the wrong way, and she did not want to offend Monica, who was apparently the future nanny for her youngest son, which earned her respect and goodwill. There was genuine concern and understanding in her voice. The noble's mansion looked luxurious, rich antique furniture, exquisite decorative items. Everything was thought out to the smallest detail, which gave the room an atmosphere of comfort and nobility, as if reflecting the rich history of the family, which had absorbed centuries of tradition. The antique furniture in the room, decorated with an exquisite table and chairs, gave the interior a special charm, and their luxury only emphasized the high status of the owners of this magnificent house, as if the atmosphere itself resurrected the glorious times of the past. The woman was truly wonderful, kind, caring, beautiful, and Monica, watching her, thought that if she had a mother like this aristocrat, she too probably would not be in a hurry to get married, appreciating family comfort and peace, since life itself with such care would be real happiness. Suddenly, as if breaking her thoughts, a gentle hand touched her with a light movement, and the girl returned to reality, feeling how this touch seemed to pierce the space with warm care, interrupting her thoughts and drawing attention to what was happening. With a slight but sincere smile that revealed all the kindness of her heart, the lady softly said that she liked Monica very much and that she was ready to give permission to take care of her youngest son, feeling that the girl would be a caring and attentive person for the child. Monica, feeling grateful for the care offered, respectfully thanked the woman for her kind words. The woman, in turn, continued with a gentle smile, adding that Monica could always come to her with questions or problems if they arose, and that she was ready to help. Blushing slightly, Monica felt her heart fill with joy and gratitude, realizing that now, with permission to stay in this magnificent mansion, she would be able to become a part of this beautiful atmosphere filled with comfort and warmth. Slowly and gracefully, the noble woman rose from her seat, carefully picking up her blue dress that flowed over her figure like a waterfall, and headed towards the door, leaving Monica in silence, filled with deep reflections on the new stage in her life. She called one of the maids and gently instructed her to take the new nanny to her room so that Monica could settle in and feel comfortable in her new home, where everything was set up for the comfort and peace of her future stay. Monica also stood up from her seat, feeling excitement and trepidation overwhelm her, and was offered help by the butler, who readily offered his services in carrying her things upstairs, helping to arrange her new corner of the mansion. The lady, with a slight smile, stated that she would be paid 500 coins a week for performing her duties, and hearing such a generous sum, Monica stopped in surprise because she was ready to receive such a sum only for a whole month of work, and not for a week. The noblewoman, understanding her feelings, added with a slight wink that at such an age it was indeed important to have enough money to provide oneself with comfort and stability, because it was not only a privilege, but also a necessity for a lady of her position. Monica, feeling grateful for such an offer and care, sincerely thanked the aristocrat for her attention, the promised salary and support, and she, in turn, gently asked her to take care of her son, promising that her work would be highly appreciated. With a feeling of relief and slight joy, the girl walked behind the lady, thinking about how her life could now change dramatically thanks to the generous working conditions that she was offered, because she could not even imagine that she would receive such an offer. Monica was already mentally anticipating how she would spend her first tutor's salary on something pleasant for herself, perhaps a new umbrella, an elegant hat, or a light dress, and then enjoy walks along the seashore, filled with a feeling of freedom and joy. Suddenly, the noblewoman stopped, smiling softly, and said that she would now introduce her youngest son to the nanny, and then invite her to dinner to get to know her better and discuss the duties that await her in the future, specifying that she would be pleased to share all the nuances of the job. Before she had finished her words, the lady's 2 children appeared on the horizon, running rapidly along the corridor. Their cheerful steps grew louder every moment, and now they were standing before her, with joyful faces filled with lively, endless energy. The lady turned to her children with a smile, tenderly asking if they were all right, carefully adjusting their clothes and comforting them if needed. She showed such attention to her children that Monica could not help but feel respect for her motherly attitude. Monica, following the old manners, made an elegant curtsy, introducing herself to the noble family with respect and slight excitement, because it was important for her to make a good impression on such important people with whom she now had to work. Suddenly, Monica's face changed beyond recognition, and in its place appeared an expression of complete incomprehension and horror, as her heart began to pound in her chest as if in a crazy rhythm, and she realized that in front of her stood a person she had absolutely not expected to see. There were two people standing in front of her, a boy with dark, chocolate-colored hair and piercing gray eyes, and a girl with curly locks, dressed in a pink dress, whose charming features and refined posture immediately attracted everyone's attention, causing admiration. The young girl had long hair, like a true aristocrat, and a pink dress that perfectly emphasized her elegant and refined image, which made her even more beautiful, graceful, and irresistible in her great sophistication. It was Lizzie, her friend from the shelter, and Monica recognized her immediately, without the slightest doubt. Lizzie's face remained the same as before, with lively gray eyes, full of sincere emotions, and plump lips that always gave a feeling of warmth and trust. The same girl who had once given her the brooch, giving her a chance to be freed from the orphanage, was now standing in front of her, and Monica, as if she were reliving that moment again, felt how all the memories of that time surfaced in her mind with special strength and brightness. The woman, watching the proceedings with a slight smile, suggested that her son take a step towards a new life and introduce himself to his new mentor, Miss Monica, which was not only logical but also important for their family traditions and upbringing. The boy, reservedly but with obvious respect, smiled and introduced himself to her, following his upbringing and norms, and his mother, in turn, added that he should now address her with due respect as a teacher, which was absolutely natural for their aristocratic environment. Lizzie, with a small, easy smile, introduced herself by her new name as the charming Liella. She was like a beautiful rose, refined and beautiful, but in her gaze there was a coldness, a distance, like someone who was accustomed to high society. The aristocrat, with a light and confident smile, introduced her daughter, who was as elegant and refined as her mother, and they all, as if a single whole, were similar to each other, creating the impression of a true aristocratic family where every element was exactly in its place. Monica froze in place, feeling like the words about her being Lizzie's friend sounded almost like something impossible, because in her soul there was a feeling that it simply couldn't be true. Their worlds, views, and circumstances were too different. The girl clutched the handles of her old bag tighter, as if trying to find support in the familiar and usual gesture, feeling how cold anxiety was gripping her, and her heart was pierced by painful echoes of the past that she had tried so hard to leave behind. Coldly, as if by inertia, Lizzie stood next to her younger brother's nanny, as if not paying attention to Monica's presence, and, without hiding her feelings, said that she was glad to meet her, although her words were not sincere, and the lie was obvious in her gaze. Monica kept her eyes on Lizzie, trying to hide the excitement and embarrassment that washed over her with every movement of this girl, because every gesture, every movement of hers reminded her of that distant past, of what remained in the depths of her heart, but was never said out loud. The mother, with a slight and gentle smile, asked her children to bring the new tutor into her room if it would not be difficult for them, and her voice sounded with such a soft but decisive tone that it was clear that this was not just a request, but a kind of instruction. When her son asked which room exactly to take Monica to, the mother replied that it would be wise to place her in the next room, next to her son's room, which would create convenience for everyone, including Monica herself, providing comfort and closeness. The boy, with a light and kind smile, readily agreed to fulfill his mother's request, and his face instantly lit up with a sincere desire to help as soon as he heard her words, reflecting in his eyes that pure joy from the fact that he could be useful. Martinel, with genuine childish curiosity and a sincere interest in the world around him, asked his young mentor how old she was, to which she, smiling playfully, laughed warmly and, bowing her head, tenderly replied that she was about 10 years old, maybe a little older. The young boy, slightly embarrassed, blushing and looking down, pointed to his funny knee socks and with a light laugh explained that he had put them on at the insistence of his caring mother, so as not to catch a cold, although perhaps it was because of them that he now looked younger than his age and seemed younger to others. With a sincere, almost naive expression in his eyes and a slight excitement in his soul, the boy looked at the girl with hidden hope, as if asking if he looked grown up, and she, smiling a little, nodded affirmatively, as if wanting to support him in this innocent, touching aspiration. Martinel was the second son of a noble aristocratic family, a sweet boy with soft chestnut hair, light gray, thoughtful eyes, and a charming, open smile. He gave the impression of a pleasant, well-mannered, intelligent, and very nice, good-natured child. He was remarkably similar to his mother, especially in his kind, bright, and sincere smile, gentle manner of communication, sensitivity, and warm look, in which one could easily guess the same tenderness that once warmed their entire cozy home, filled with love. But in his appearance, despite all the charm, there was something strange, alarming, and almost elusive, which did not escape the attentive nanny, and she, alert, turned sharply to look at his sister, sensitively feeling the growing excitement inside. Young Martinel, noticing that his relative was noticeably lagging behind and was trudging along slowly, looked around anxiously, and then with gentle insistence loudly called her name, hoping that she would speed up and catch up with them so that they could continue their journey together, as before. The grown-up girl, despite her natural beauty and noble appearance, only silently looked forward. She was charming in her own way, soft lips, delicate features, smooth skin, but her face remained detached, as if completely devoid of emotion and warmth. Slowly, as if immersed in her own clever thoughts, memories, and strange feelings, she took a few leisurely steps towards them, without raising her eyes, as if her legs were moving on their own, drawn by a quiet inner impulse, barely conscious. And just a few moments later, Lizzie walked past them silently, without saying a single word, without even a fleeting glance, as if she didn't notice those present at all, as if they were just shadows from her past, alien and unnecessary. Monica couldn't take her eyes off her. She reminded her so much of her close childhood friend, that same girl with a serious look, a dreamy nature, and a strange, almost fairy tale silence emanating from her every movement and quick step. At the very end of a narrow, dimly lit corridor was a small, neat boys' room, and a white, almost shining door with a thin metal handle led inside, hiding behind it a place filled with children's dreams, light and peace. Sighing slightly disappointedly, Martinel looked at his new tutor and, frowning, admitted with slight sadness that he did not like the white lace curtains on the windows, which seemed dull to him, to which Monica suddenly laughed cheerfully in response. Suddenly, as if called by intuition or a shadow from the past, she turned back again, and her piercing gaze of emerald green eyes stopped on something that awakened in her a lively interest, tense alertness, and deep attention. With a quick, slightly hasty step, filled with inner determination and slight anxiety, she headed for the door, which was a little to the side, was upholstered in gray fabric, without curtains or decorations, and for a moment she thought that this was her old room. Her graceful hand, thin but confident, slowly and with deliberate grace, reached out to the small door handle, as if she were preparing to open something important, forgotten and personal, almost sacred, which kept the secrets of her childhood, hidden from everyone, forgotten in the shadows. But before she could even touch the door handle, she was abruptly stopped by the loud, commanding voice of the lady behind her, which seemed to penetrate into her very soul. Lizzie, folding her arms across her chest, coldly and harshly declared that behind this door there was only a warehouse of old, unnecessary property, junk. On the girl's refined hands, as a sign of her origin, shone exquisite white lace gloves, decorated with the finest patterns and pearl embroidery. They were incredibly expensive, handmade in a capital workshop by personal order of her mother. Uncomfortably aware of the fingers of her right hand, nervously clenching on the bag that was in front of her, Monica couldn't shake the feeling that everything that was happening around her was too tense and uncomfortable, and her gaze darted around the room, trying to find even the slightest comfort or object that could distract her. After this, The noblewoman, holding back a slight irritation and trying to remain calm, pointed with her hand to the next door, but her voice sounded restrained and clear when she said that this was the room of the new nanny with whom they had to talk, because for some reason she remained unnoticed. Martinel suddenly intervened in their conversation, asking his older sister with slight excitement why she spoke so harshly and rudely to their guest, not trying to hide her displeasure and surprise. He felt the growing tension between them and decided to find out what was the reason. He was seriously worried that her cold behavior was connected with the fact that a few days ago he had accidentally broken her favorite watch, and now she could not forgive him for this offense, although she herself began to avoid talking about it, apparently feeling terrible resentment. With a sigh, Monica finally realized that she was just upset, as meeting a new person and having to meet her brother's new nanny had unsettled her more than she expected. She tried to remember the last name but quickly realized that she was nervous. Monica Orphan repeated her name with some embarrassment to the aristocrat opposite her, trying to sound as confident as possible, although the inner tension was still noticeable in her voice, and she could not get rid of a slight awkwardness. Suddenly, Martinel, unable to contain himself, shouted, demanding that his servant immediately stop taking his things, and full of anger, repeated his command even louder that she return all his personal items to their place without giving her a chance to explain. He noticed the maid carrying away his toy wooden blocks, which he had a close connection with and kept as his most treasured possessions, and he saw her freeze in bewilderment, not understanding what could have caused such a violent and furious reaction on his part. Martinel, unable to hide his rage, continued to shout, demanding that the lady immediately take his things back, and losing his temper began to push her, trying to get his toys back, to put everything back in its place, while Monica silently watched what was happening, not knowing how to react. Lizzie, without saying a single word, turned around and, as if ignoring everything that was happening, walked silently into the stranger's room. Her steps were calm and confident, but there was something hidden in them, as if she was avoiding unnecessary words in this tense moment, trying to keep her distance and not interfere with the situation. Inside the room was a cozy bedroom in blue tones. The walls were decorated with beautiful details, and the table, bed, and chair were arranged neatly and harmoniously, creating an atmosphere of peace. But it all looked like the room was hiding some deep secret that no one should know. Lizzie waved her hand with slight irritation and, not paying attention to Monica's surprised look, said that she could leave her things in this room because, according to her, this was not her room, and nothing prevented her from staying here at least for a while until another place was found. The girl stared at her reflection in the mirror with slight bewilderment, carefully examining herself, as if trying to understand how suitable she was for this new role, and at the same time ignoring the words of her new mistress, who continued to speak, but Monica could not concentrate. After that, somewhat confused, Monica nodded, acknowledging that everything had become a little clearer, and with a weak smile, turned to Lizzie, who, for some reason, again insistently asked her to remind her of her last name, as if it was important to her. Calmly and with restraint, Orphan repeated her last name, while firmly and confidently stating that the aristocrat could not have forgotten her name so easily, especially if it was done specifically to humiliate her, because she felt that there was some hidden meaning in this. Even though Monica had made a mistake, confusing him with a guy, taking him for a strict patient and thinking that he was a completely different person, but in this situation, in front of sweet Lizzie, she was absolutely sure that she was not mistaken, because her feelings and intuition did not fail her. Her hair was dyed from deep black to chestnut, which gave her image an extraordinary elegance, but the tense and strange attitude that emanated from the girl could not help but be alarming, especially in her relationship with the new nanny. It was the same person, the same girl who had grown up, but now, for some reason, suddenly began to hate Monica, as if the years and changed perceptions had turned everything upside down, and now her attitude was completely different. Putting on an artificial smile, Monica greeted the lovely Lizzie with restraint and said that now, finally, she was no longer pretending, because she had already recognized her, despite all these changes and even the unusual manifestations that she had. With her arms folded across her chest and a look of mild disdain, the girl rudely asked the tutor why she had come to their family at all, what reason she had for being here, as if she were looking for an answer to a question that had long since gone unanswered. Monica made it clear that her only reason for coming to this house was to seek employment as a tutor, and her intentions were strictly limited to professional duties and not to interfering in the personal affairs or internal problems of this family. From her bag, she carefully pulled out a letter of recommendation containing all the necessary evidence of her qualifications and right to work in this house, hoping that this document would play a key role in making a decision about her possible employment. Rudely, with obvious contempt and a complete lack of interest, Lizzie snatched the letter from her hands without even a passing glance, and then, as if the whole scene had been nothing more than a waste of time for her, she turned silently and walked on. Monica, feeling a little embarrassed, tried to clarify her position, emphasizing that she had previously worked with a friend who also worked with children, and perhaps Lizzie should give her a chance and trust her professional experience a little more before jumping to conclusions. With a sharp, angry movement, Lizzie tore the letter, and a loud, sharp crack of paper pierced the silence like a lightning strike, causing Monica to freeze in horror. It was so unexpected that she could not believe her eyes, not expecting such aggression from her former friend. Monica, feeling intense fear and unbearable pain from Lizzie's actions, felt her body tense up and her heart skip a beat, because she couldn't believe that her former friend had treated her so cruelly and uncompromisingly, without any respect. Lizzie, not satisfied with her actions, continued to tear the paper, not noticing how her actions were becoming more and more destructive. Each sharp crack, like sharp knives, tore through the silence, increasing the tension and filling Monica with a complete feeling of helplessness. Monica, gathering all her will and determination, demanded that Lizzie immediately return the remaining parts of the letter to her, feeling how her anger and insult overwhelmed her, and she was not going to put up with such humiliation, ready to defend her dignity. Monica grabbed the rest of the paper sharply and tried to tear it out of Lizzie's hands. Her fingers clenched as if that scrap of paper contained her last hope for salvation, and with each passing second the tension grew, as if the paper itself had become a symbol of her endless struggle with the past. Suddenly there was a sharp and deafening blow, and Monica found herself on the floor, not having time to react or understand what was happening, feeling blood running down her arm from a painful scratch. Every movement was echoed by sharp pain, but in her eyes there was still shock from what had happened. Lizzie, with a haughty expression on her face, said sullenly that Monica was a good actress, but her acting had now become too obvious. With undisguised contempt, she added that she did not believe in her pathetic attempts and was not going to forgive her for everything that had happened. After that, she decisively and with complete confidence threw the rest of the paper on the floor and with icy calm said that Monica should remember that she now had a new name, Liella, as if this was an inevitable and final step in their relationship that could not be undone. Orphan watched with horror and confusion as the paper flew towards the floor, because it was not just a letter, but an important letter of recommendation that could not be lost, and every part of it was of great importance for her future. The girl, almost losing her composure and determination, hastily rushed to collect the torn pieces of paper, because from the remaining fragments she needed to restore everything that could have meaning, because even a small piece turned out to be important in this situation and could decide everything. There was a bloody mark left on her hand from sharp nails, as if it was a mark of that cruel and painful fight that happened at that moment, a reminder of the break between them and how everything changed in an instant, forever changing their lives. Destroyed inside and filled with anger, Monica couldn't help but look at her with despair and rage as her eyes met those of her former friend, who in turn barely hid her disgust and contempt, not wanting to look weak. Liella, without any emotion and with a cold gaze, said angrily that Orphan was clearly hiding his true identity and came here with bad intentions, trying to convince everyone of his innocence and righteousness, but her words sounded like nothing more than an empty accusation that had no truth behind it. Monica looked at her angrily and with obvious bewilderment, not understanding why Liella decided that she was lying, because she was not lying. But for some reason this very thought suddenly came into her head, as if Liella was trying to find a reason for a new insult and another misunderstanding, which she was so afraid of. Standing up, Monica said with defiance and confidence that she was not the only orphan in this room, hoping to offend Liella and hurt her with her words, but she, not wanting to endure and feeling vulnerable, immediately screamed for Monica to immediately shut her mouth. Orphan took a few steps towards Liella, looking at her with hostility, and saying that she knows what a mean and cruel person is in front of her, and does not forget what happened 10 years ago, when everything between them changed. And all this left deep emotional scars. Hugging herself with her arms and trembling with excitement and inner struggle, Liella whispered with some kind of vague longing, asking whether Monica had come here to take her place, or was she ready to accept her destiny and learn to be who she had always wanted to be. Orphan grabbed Liella roughly by the shoulders and, with a look of determination on her face, ordered her to wake up, stating that she had no bad intentions and that she had only come here to work, tutoring and helping the students. Hearing a strange and sharp noise, Liella turned around instantly, and her gaze met the woman who was approaching with clear intent, knowing exactly that she had to pick up the letter of recommendation from the new nanny without allowing any misunderstandings. It was Liella's foster mother, who walked towards them with a light gait and attention to her goal, intending to pick up a letter of recommendation from the new nanny, completely oblivious to what was happening around her, absorbed only in the fulfillment of her task. She thought with delight and slight surprise that there had clearly been some misunderstanding between the two girls, but quickly realizing the situation, her thoughts switched to her younger son, who, as she noticed, was for some reason absent at that moment. With a barely noticeable mocking smile, Liella informed her mother that the youngest son was furious with the maid because she tried to take his job, interfering with his duties and trying to take his place, which caused him great disappointment and resentment. She started a conversation with her mother about her younger brother, expressing her displeasure with his childish pranks and endless antics, and also mentioned that he probably went with a neighbor girl to have fun, making a mess and playing with unnecessary things, as always. When Liella demanded to give her the letter of recommendation, young Monica froze for a moment, not knowing how to answer correctly, because her thoughts were confused, and she could not understand what to do so as not to ruin everything and not reveal her strange intentions. The lady noted with a smile that after she had given birth to 2 children, she had become so forgetful, as if age and the cares of family had clouded her memory, turning her into a person increasingly prone to absent-mindedness and minor shortcomings that would not have happened before. Orphan took a closer look at her former friend and seemed to realize that she was playing a role again, pretending to be the woman's daughter. Her behavior was too fake, and she was clearly trying to hide her true intentions by manipulating the situation. The beautiful Monica raised her hand, hesitating a little, and awkwardly admitted that she had accidentally damaged the letter, which unexpectedly surprised her new mistress, who clearly did not expect such a confession and was somewhat shocked by her great frankness. With her wounded hand, which still had a trace of blood on it, she began to slowly take out the torn letter, explaining that she had accidentally damaged it while trying to get it out of her bag, and her words sounded like a slight justification, although they hid the real reason for the damage. Concerned and a little wary, the woman turned to her eldest daughter and asked why there was a wound on their nanny's hand, since she had not noticed it before, and this situation made her anxious, as if something was wrong, and she could not understand what exactly. With her head down, Liella replied that Orphan had hurt herself on the door star when she went inside, and although her words rang true, it was obvious that she was lying, but doing it with such skill that not a single detail gave away her lie, and she remained confident in her answer. She then added that she was going to help Orphan, bring her some bandages, and then treat the wound, demonstrating care and concern, but there was still a slight tension in her voice, as if she was trying to speed up the conversation and avoid unnecessary questions. Monica intervened in the conversation, saying that everything was fine, she had bandages, and only after remembering that she could not give the letter back, she added that the whole situation had become too confusing, because it was already damaged and could not be returned, which made her feel awkward. With a disconcerted sigh, the sweet lady said that, unfortunately, the paper had been spoiled, as if she had a presentiment of unpleasant consequences and understood that this could affect the further development of events, which had now become much more complicated. The woman, putting her hand to her chin, looked thoughtfully at the torn letter and quietly said that it seemed like it was done on purpose, as if someone had known in advance how exactly everything would develop, and this caused her bewilderment and anxiety, as if someone had carefully planned everything that was happening. Liella again interrupted the conversation, not giving anyone a chance to answer, and lied again, claiming that she was also in shock because when she entered the room, Orphan's hand was already wounded and the paper was damaged, trying to inspire confidence and convince everyone of her truthfulness, but her words sounded unconvincing. The aristocrat, looking at her daughter in surprise, asked what she meant, and Liella, with slight nervousness, replied that she had seen how the paper had already been damaged in the hands of their nanny, trying to justify her words, but her voice betrayed her anxiety and she herself was nervous. The noblewoman quickly realized that her daughter had lied, and instantly caught her in her lie. Her gaze became sharp and penetrating, and the tension in the air became palpable, as if everything around froze from the painful awareness of what was happening. Everything that was happening became obvious. Liella began to tremble with fear, clutching the hem of her dress with her hands, trying to hide her worries, but her gestures betrayed her anxiety, and Orphan, watching her old friend, noticed how she was clearly worried, as if the whole world had suddenly turned against her, and she felt the pressure. Earlier, the girl had been severely reprimanded by the strict headmistress, whose cold expression seemed to chill her to the bone, and the poor little girl, unable to withstand the pressure, burst into tears right in the corridor, clutching her notebooks in her hands and looking down at the floor. Every time Lizzie heard strict reproaches and comments from her mother, she began to worry greatly, hiding in her room, and even her hands trembled, giving away all her doubts, and this habitual reaction was not accidental. It arose in childhood, when she often had to hear criticism. The lady, known for her strictness and determination, told her daughter that it was extremely difficult to deceive her, but after some time she admitted that she herself had lied, talking about the dress that was not made for her the way she wanted, and which brought her a lot of inconvenience and problems. Lizzie stated loudly, with obvious determination and confidence, that the real reason for what happened was completely different, and she was not going to hide the truth, despite the fact that she was part of the situation and somehow caused what happened with the dress. Later, Lizzie decided to come up with another lie, claiming that her dress had caused sweet Monica to slip, fall, and get scratched, hoping that this explanation would hide the real cause of the incident, although in reality it was just an attempt to avoid the truth. Surprisingly, Orphan had positioned herself so strangely during their conversation that it seemed she was completely out of place in what was happening, as if she were a casual observer, absorbed in what was happening around her, not wanting to interfere or express her point of view. She often heard about Lizzie's mother, who spent a lot of time with her daughter, and they often went to the studio where they chose new dresses, happily trying on different outfits and enjoying this process of choosing, in which there was always room for excitement. And then one day they made her a dress that went all the way to the floor, so long that the beautiful hem dragged along the floor. And although Lizzie loved to wear beautiful clothes, this dress was too long for her height, which made it uncomfortable, and also not quite suitable for such occasions. At the very moment when her graceful legs suddenly gave way and she was about to collapse onto the cold marble floor, the Duke quickly arrived, firmly grabbed her by the waist and, not allowing her to fall, thereby awakened a trembling feeling of love in their hearts. After a short time, when sincere feelings had already fully blossomed in their hearts, like a lush garden in spring, they arranged a magnificent wedding, and all the guests admired the noble lady, who came from an ancient, respected family with an impeccable reputation. Suddenly, unable to restrain herself, the noblewoman began to scold her daughter, accusing her of not thinking about the consequences of fashion and not realizing how dangerous it was to wear such long dresses, which, in her opinion, could lead to unexpected and unpleasant consequences. Putting her hands to her face in embarrassment, Lizzie suddenly said, as if from the depths of her heart, that she would very much like her mother, to get into such a magical love story, to fall in love and marry her savior, hoping for the happiness that she saw in the Duke's eyes. She had long had her eye on one lord, a truly dazzling handsome man, drowning in luxury, shining with wealth, sophistication and impeccable manners, and she had often imagined in her mind how one day she would win his heart and become the mistress of his huge castle. Dreamily folding her graceful hands in front of her, lowering her eyelashes and looking through a thin veil of dreams out the window, the girl thought about how delightful it would be if this noble lord one day embraced her and they had a magnificent wedding. Mother, hearing such naive and touching words from her daughter, barely holding back a smile, allowed herself to laugh softly, but Lizzie, slightly embarrassed, modestly noted that the Lord had praised the letter of recommendation for Orphan precisely because of her efforts. The woman sighed heavily and deeply, as if trying to release the remnants of annoyance from her chest, but a warm, almost maternal smile appeared on her lips. She finally admitted that the lost letter could not be restored, and decided to accept what had happened with dignity. After some time, without showing any particular interest, she nevertheless asked her son's new governess whether she liked the room she had been given, and Monica, with restraint but sincerity, replied that the room was spacious, bright, and truly cozy. The lady listened attentively to her modest and respectful answer, noting to herself the girl's restraint and nodding slightly in approval, with majestic calm invited Monica to join the family dinner after she had rested a little. When the polite conversation came to an end and the lady left, the heavy door with the noble coat of arms closed quietly and leisurely behind her, leaving young Orphan alone in her new room, where there reigned comfort, silence, and the almost forgotten feeling of the beginning of a completely new life. Tired from a busy day and endless conversations, Orphan slowly sank down onto the soft blue couch next to the bed, ran her hand over her temple and took a deep breath. All the fuss of the last few hours had exhausted her in both body and soul, leaving a feeling of slight emptiness. Meanwhile, the mother and daughter slowly descended the wide staircase, flooded with soft evening light, and having waited until they were finally alone, the beautiful woman in a restrained tone told her daughter not to beat around the bush anymore, but to tell the whole truth as it was. Squinting sternly, the lady asked sternly whether her daughter did not find it suspicious that Monica, being a reserved and well-mannered girl, would hardly have torn up the letter of recommendation herself, which meant that someone had intentionally helped her in this act. The girl, slightly pale, weakly replied that perhaps dear Orphan had done it by accident, and then her younger brother had torn the paper and had immediately run away. However, despite what she had said, she still did not want to reveal the truth, hiding the true events. The noblewoman turned gently to her daughter and, smiling mysteriously, asked if her younger brother had done this, since his pranks were often inexplicable, and then expressed the hope that, despite all the difficulties, Lizzie would still be able to make friends with their new nanny, at least a little, since this could make life easier for the whole family. The beauty froze on the stairs. Her face remained impenetrable, devoid of any emotion, like cold marble hiding all her inner experiences, and her gaze was empty, like an immense abyss, as if she was trying to hide her thoughts from everyone around her, not wanting to open up. But her hands in lace gloves tightly clutched the hem of her pink dress, and an inner irritation flared up in her chest like a flame, making her feel how the anger hidden under her refined and impeccable appearance was trying to break out, ready to destroy everything. On the table in front of them lay an exquisite dish, meat with vegetables cooked to perfection, and the smell in the air was so appetizing that even the most discerning guests could not remain indifferent, feeling how the air seemed to be filled with a sense of comfort. The entire aristocratic family gathered at one table, and among them sat Monica, a real noblewoman, who with polite interest asked the mistress of the estate whether she liked the food served and whether she could spare a little time to help her youngest son prepare for his lessons. Orphan, feeling a little modest, looked up and expressed her gratitude to the hospitable hostess of the estate, thanking her with sincere warmth for the reception, which became a real relief for her and gave her a feeling of comfort in this house. The aristocrat's eldest daughter, with quiet curiosity and delicacy, raised her hand and, with undisguised interest, asked her mother if she could tell the new tutor about her younger brother's preferences, to which the mother, smiling slightly, gave her consent in order to help in this matter. Martinel, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, protested, shaking his head, declaring that he was quite capable of speaking for himself, without anyone's help, to which his sister replied with a slight reproach that he should first eat quietly and then share his opinions. The boy, embarrassed by her remark, shyly promised that he would no longer chew and slurp loudly, and tried to behave more restrainedly. The girl, in turn, with a kind smile, noted that despite all his manners, he continued to grow and, of course, ate well. Their mother, unable to hold back a sincere smile, was only ready to make fun of her children with light humor, adding with tender warmth that they got along quite well with each other, despite the significant difference in age, which sincerely surprised and pleased her. Monica, sitting in the corner, just nodded awkwardly, because she had only recently met this large and noisy family, and she was a little uncomfortable being among so many people. However, she couldn't help but smile watching their warm and sincere interaction. Martinel lay quietly in his bed, and his caring sister checked his temperature with care and patience, carefully placing the thermometer in his mouth to find out exactly what his current state of health was. After she took out the thermometer and looked at its readings, a look of relief appeared on the sister's face when she realized that the temperature was normal, and this brought her some peace of mind because her worries were not in vain. Turning to Orphan, she gently added that for the peace of mind of all who cared for him, it would be necessary to check the boy's temperature every evening, since his health was weak and required special attention from her. Liella, noticing that the check was complete, carefully walked towards the door, carefully touching its handle as if intending to leave the room, but deep down, knowing that she should always be there when her brother needed help again. Before leaving, Liella addressed Orphan, asking her in a reserved and serious tone to speak to her alone, as there was an urgent need to discuss important matters that could not be delayed and had to be resolved immediately. The room, lit by soft light, contained wooden objects, a mirror, several books, everything necessary for a cozy space which, however, hid within itself many unresolved problems and questions requiring attention. Sitting on the bed, Liella stated firmly that her mother had noticed their lies and was beginning to suspect that something was wrong, which meant that they now had to be careful to avoid further misunderstandings and keep their secrets safe. After this, Liella added, turning to Orphan, who stood directly opposite her, that now she did not know what to do with what was happening and how best to act in the current situation, which was becoming more and more confusing. Monica looked at her with confusion and asked what they should do now, what all this meant, and how they could justify their actions to others to avoid unnecessary questions and possible consequences. Frowning, the lady asked her companion seriously if she wanted her to tell another false story that could hide the truth and calm everyone who was interested in what was really going on. Earlier, before dinner, the head maid had quietly entered Lizzie's room to show her around every corner of this magnificent mansion, telling her about its features and the incredible atmosphere that filled every corner. After this, the maid introduced her with a smile to the other maids, who, happily accepting the newcomer, greeted her with friendly looks and a warm attitude, promising to do everything to make her stay here as pleasant and comfortable as possible. Communicating with other servants, Lizzie learned the fascinating history of this mansion, which was built more than 10 years ago by a noble family, and now passed into the hands of new nobles, who became the owners of this majestic and luxurious house. As for Lizzie herself, she was adopted before they moved into this mansion, and since then she has acquired the status of a real daughter of a noblewoman, winning respect and recognition not only in the family, but also among the locals, receiving a high position in society. Until the very end, they never learned the sad truth that, by a fatal mistake, they had accepted a completely strange child into their family, and the noblewoman did not even suspect that the girl named Lizzie was not her blood and legitimate daughter from the very beginning. It seemed that this woman, tired of life, confidently played the role of a mother of 2 children, not giving those around her the slightest reason to doubt that in the past she had had a tragic miscarriage, which she either could not forget or preferred to stubbornly not remember and hide. In reality, Monica was just a humble orphan, a nurse by profession, a woman without malice, who had no sinister, vengeful, or mean plans against her once close childhood friend, whom she still sincerely respected and appreciated. As she stood on the threshold of the old room, the soft carpet beneath her feet seemed to give her an invisible confidence, and she calmly but firmly made it clear to her old acquaintance that she did not intend to leave this house, at least until she was heard, understood, and taken seriously. And then, as if summing up her confessions, she calmly added that all she really wanted was a little money to live on, not for any luxury or revenge, but simply to survive in this difficult world that is indifferent to the misfortunes of others. Monica began to tell how she had worked tirelessly since she was 18 at 2 backbreaking jobs, one of which she had never been paid for as a nurse, and now, as an adult, she could not even afford a cheap hotel room. Her hands, withered from work and time, were neatly folded before her on her faded blue dress, and in this simple, almost ceremonial gesture, there was something piercingly bitter, like a silent prayer addressed to those who would never answer. And then she added with meek but great gratitude that it was thanks to the generosity of her friend's mother that for the first time in her life she had the opportunity to truly eat her fill, to feel the taste of bread without haste, and to fill her exhausted body with warmth and peace. After a short pause, Monica said, with restraint and a slight hint of reproach in her voice, that she remembered very well how once, on one of those particularly difficult days, she had done Lizzie a small but important service, and sincerely hoped that, despite everything, she also remembered that moment. Liella, slightly squinting and crossing her arms over her chest, listened attentively, almost painfully concentrated to the story, knowing full well and deeply realizing that Orphan from the very beginning wanted to be perceived only as a temporary tutor for her younger brother, and nothing more. Bowing her head in a gesture full of fatigue, humility, and barely noticeable pain, Monica, as if gathering within herself the last remnants of wounded pride, quietly, in an almost whispering voice, called her old friend Ice, and carefully, with a barely noticeable tremor, asked her to fulfill one last important request. Liella frowned, and her face seemed to darken like a sky covered with storm clouds. She silently but tensely looked at Monica, not feeling much confidence in Orphan and apparently experiencing internal irritation, doubt, and some vague premonition of trouble. Monica, having finished her quiet and respectful bow, smoothly returned to her previous position, straightening her back with a slight weariness, as if an old burden had fallen on her shoulders again, and her gaze became a little more detached, elusive and thoughtful than before. With her hands on her hips, slightly irritated and her lips pursed, Liella, with a slight sigh and without hiding her severity, coldly and clearly stated that she now finally understood what the girl had been trying to say all this time, what she had been trying to achieve, and what decision she needed to make. Without a word, she placed her thin, tense palm on the cold door handle, squeezing it with a slight effort, as if letting go of all the worries and negativity, and restrainedly agreed to never again remember the past and those difficult events that were now left behind in the past. After that, Orphan was left completely alone in a semi-dark, slightly emasculated room. She tiredly sank down onto a soft couch, feeling how tension and anxiety slowly left her body, and with an absent-minded look, began to study the surroundings around her. Clutching her head with both hands, with a noticeable tension in her fingers, she exhaled heavily and thought that she probably should have unpacked her luggage, tidied herself up, washed herself, changed her clothes. After all, it was already getting inexorably dark outside. She carefully placed her suitcase on the floor, feeling the fatigue of the long journey finally overtake her body, and began to slowly unzip it, preparing to unpack her things, each of her movements filled with the feeling of the weight of the journey fading away. Then, to her surprise, things began to jump out of the chest, as if they had a will of their own, and with a loud noise they scattered across the floor, creating a real mess of clothes that seemed unable to stay in place any longer and were striving to be freed. Confused, Monica stood frozen in place with her hand raised, not knowing how to react to what was happening, and feeling how the internal tension was growing with each passing moment, as if her entire reality had suddenly shaken, and the world around her began to seem somehow alien and incomprehensible. Among the decomposed things, carelessly lying on the floor, her gaze stopped on a brooch, a piece of jewelry that was once given to her not just by a friend, but by a person with whom she might now never cross paths. At that moment, Monica felt how memories of this person filled her thoughts again. With a hand that shook slightly from excitement and confusion, she carefully grabbed the jewelry as if trying to hold on to it, to feel a connection again with those times when her world was simpler and everything seemed clear, bright, and full of hope. This brooch became a symbol of those lost moments. Young Monica stood motionless, looking at her beautiful brooch, completely oblivious to everything around her, absorbed in her thoughts. The dark corner of the room seemed to be absorbing her, but external reality remained for her for a second, somewhere far away. At this time, the sky stretched outside the window, light clouds, as if caressing, reminded that a new day was ahead, full of opportunities and hopes. It was a strange feeling, as if a new day brought new changes, and Monica could not get rid of the thought that her life was about to change. The leaves rustled softly in the wind, swaying in light dances, as if the trees themselves were about to tell their ancient secrets, conveyed in the rustle, and the light wind carried with it the smells of nature and the muffled sounds of the surrounding world, creating an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. Monica, overcome with confusion, walked slowly down the corridor. Her thoughts were confused and foggy, and despite all her determination, she felt how fatigue gradually took hold of her, forcing her to close her eyes from an irresistible desire to rest and forget herself in the shadows. In one of the rooms, Marie, a colleague who was almost like a sister, was already waiting for her, and despite the fact that Monica worked as a tutor, her duties required concentration. But at this moment, she could only hope for the support of her faithful assistant and invaluable friend. Tired, the girl sat down at the table in the kitchen, where the lamp was shining warmly, and the smell of freshly brewed tea spread throughout the room, creating a cozy atmosphere, and the maid approached with a smile, asking if she was hungry, offering food, as if caring about her rest and recovery. After that, the girl, after thinking for a while, asked a question that had been intriguing her for a long time. Did Marie know where she could find a market nearby to buy the necessary things and products, because she was not familiar with this place and did not know where to go for the necessary purchases? When Monica asked this question, Marie answered with a slight smile that if she needed to buy something, she should go to the main square near the station, where the market was located, and this would be the most convenient and fastest option for buying everything she needed. After this, the lady leaned forward a little, as if preparing to say something, and suddenly began calling out to her colleague, whose name was Hans, putting her hand to her lips, as if wanting to attract his attention and communicate something important or urgent, and thereby help. It was a young man with red hair, among which green leaves were slipping every now and then, and a bucket was hanging on his shoulder. Marie, laughing a little and sincerely happy, said that Hans knew perfectly well where the market was and was ready to show the way if Monica decided to go to the market today. After which the girl pointed with her hand at their new guest, the tutor of the lady's son, and said that she should be taken to the station, since she needed to get there as soon as possible, so as not to be late for an important train or a meeting, which was extremely important. Young Hans, smiling broadly and clearly delighted at this new opportunity to help, said that he would be happy to help her and suggested that they could meet at the station in half an hour, as soon as he had finished his business and was ready to accompany her. The collar of her lovely dress was special, white with gold patterns, long and elegant, shimmering beautifully in the light of the daytime sun, emphasizing her exquisite style and impeccable taste, which always attracted the attention of others and fascinated. There by the column stood young Monica in a simple gray dress, which was simple but stylish, and her every look was full of anticipation because she had been waiting for the guy for several minutes, hoping that he would appear soon and they could continue their journey together. Suddenly, a male voice caught her attention, and she instinctively turned her head in the direction of the sound and saw that Hans was heading towards her, apparently coming up to start a conversation despite the fact that he was still busy with his own affairs and did not expect to meet her here. It was Hans, who approached her with a confident gait and began to question her, saying that he knew that she had become a tutor for the landlady's son and was interested in whether this was really so, whether he was mistaken in his assumptions about her new status in the house, which surprised him very much. The lady, smiling, confirmed that this was true, but added that she had not previously been a teacher, but had worked as a nurse in the war, which had been an important life experience for her, which perhaps helped her in her new role, which she now performed with responsibility and greater understanding. The young man apologized with a smile and a little embarrassment, saying that Monica looked very young and healthy, and because of this, at first he could not believe that she could really be a tutor. But he clearly showed sympathy towards her, which was evident from his sincere expression and slight nervousness. With a soft, perky smile on her lips, the girl, laughing and looking into the eyes of her interlocutor, informed the young man that, in truth, she was a whole year older than the daughter of the noble lady in whose house they were, and this statement literally plunged him into a slight and genuine shock. Having given the young man a surprised and slightly confused look, the lady froze in place, raising an eyebrow, and tried to understand what exactly she could have said wrong, because her words seemed quite innocent, and the guy's reaction was completely unexpected for her. The sky above was summery, clear and blue, as if painted in watercolor by the hand of an artist, and bright green foliage swayed in a light breeze, and the whole picture was so alive, clear and serene, that it seemed almost magical. Crowds of townspeople, dressed in different ways and busy with their own urgent affairs, scurried through the streets in a hurry, as if each had his own urgent goal, and the station hummed with footsteps, voices, and noisy conversations, like a large living organism, eternally moving and never quieting down for a moment. Waving his hand casually towards the noisy street, Hans said with a slight sigh that he urgently needed to stop by the local blacksmith on business, after which, turning to Monica, he pointed her in the direction of a shop where she could buy combs, ribbons, and mirrors. Orphan, without losing her calm, polite, and warm smile, assured him that she would definitely try to complete all the assignments as quickly as possible, so as not to make him wait too long and not to cause any unnecessary inconvenience in the future. The guy, a little worried, frowned, scratched the back of his head, and suddenly offered to go with her, noting that these noisy old quarters were full of suspicious drunks, street jesters, and beggars. But the lady only smiled softly and confidently said that she knew how to stand up for herself. As he said goodbye, he waved his hand lightly, not hiding his warm, sincere smile, as if he hoped that their meeting would be repeated more than once, and that her walk along the busy streets, among the merchants, passers-by, and evening light, would pass calmly, safely, and without any surprises. She, too, waved her hand lightly at him in farewell, but with a barely noticeable forced smile, because his excessive kindness, obsessive participation, and constant presence began to slowly but surely cause her more and more internal tension and growing wariness. Turning the corner of a narrow street, she walked slowly along the busy row of shops and brightly colored counters, carefully looking at the shop windows and wondering where she could find a simple but sturdy comb for her long, unruly hair, which always got tangled in the mornings and irritated her. A small bell jingled cheerfully at the entrance as the door opened, and the friendly voice of the saleswoman immediately rang out from behind the counter, greeting her with a broad smile and inviting her to come inside to carefully examine the entire varied assortment of goods. Looking around the shelves and display cases, Monica quickly found a neat wooden comb with a carved pattern and a smooth surface, and then, without a moment's hesitation, she also chose a straw hat, a comfortable, practical item, ideal for summer weather and walks. Turning to the salesperson with a slight, almost polite smile, she politely asked if they could cut her some braid or bright silk ribbon, preferably with a pattern, to tie around her hat, adding a little sophistication, charm, and personality to her look. The man, smiling, said that the lady was indeed very clever, and then named the price for everything she had chosen, 60 coins. He waited a little, watching her reaction with interest, and his look was full of respect, but also a little playful confidence. The girl loudly and discontentedly said that it was too expensive, especially for such a simple thing, to which the seller firmly and confidently replied that the ribbon was made of high-quality silk, and that was why it was worth such a price, making it clear that the item was not without special value. After a short pause, but despite her doubts, Monica accepted his arguments and decided that the tape was indeed worth its money, exactly the price the seller had named. She now had in her hands something worthy of attention and use, and she felt somewhat satisfied with the purchase. With her purchases in hand, sweet Monica continued on her way with satisfaction and calm, pleased that she had finally acquired what she really wanted, and that her search had ended successfully, and her mood had risen, bringing her the joy of a successful deal. In her hands was a long ribbon, which she decisively picked up and pulled along the road, enjoying every moment, while her movements were free and easy, and the road beckoned ahead with something new and unknown, promising unexpected turns of fate, full of exciting adventures. The girl was in an optimistic mood because a solid payment was waiting for her ahead, which gave her the opportunity not only to calmly look into the future, but also to spend a little money on those things that she had long wanted, creating a feeling of lightness and self-confidence. She wondered what she should do now that all the shopping was done, and various ideas flashed through her head, but putting her finger to her lips, she tried to figure out how best to act in the current situation. Thinking about what still had to be done in the future, she realized that it was time to return, and taking a few quick steps, confidently headed down the road, as if she knew that no less important and interesting events awaited her ahead than those she had already experienced, adding to her confidence with each step along the way. The lady froze in horror and shock when she realized that with every step the situation was becoming more and more alarming, and everything that was happening was beginning to take a completely different, terrible, and unpredictable turn, making her heart beat faster from fear and excitement. Standing in the alley, she suddenly realized that she was lost. Clutching her hat to herself, wondering in terrible panic how it had happened that she had ended up in this unfamiliar and dangerous place, not knowing where to go, trying to find some kind of explanation for her bewildered state. She asked passers-by but still could not find the way back, and, becoming more and more worried, she began to quickly look around, hoping that at least someone would tell her the right direction, but all her efforts turned out to be futile and absolutely useless in this situation. Suddenly, drunk men noticed her, noticing that she was behaving strangely, and that she was holding bottles in her hands, which only increased their attention, and they began to move towards her, laughing merrily and showing obvious dissatisfaction with her behavior, getting closer and closer. They were walking straight towards her, and Monica shuddered with horror and fear. Everything seemed to be spinning in her head, and she began to turn around nervously, feeling an approaching threat from which she did not know how to hide or what to do in this situation, getting confused in her own thoughts. She needed to go back, but suddenly she didn't notice how right in front of her walked a tall man who seemed to be walking towards her. His large figure appearing so unexpectedly made her stop and think about what would happen next and why he was here. She collided with the man and fell to the floor. He grabbed his head from the strong blow, clearly shocked by the unexpected meeting, his face distorted with an expression of pain, and he literally froze in place, trying to regain his balance and not fall himself, which gave the situation additional tension. The girl apologized for not looking where she was going and, looking worriedly at the guy, asked if he was okay, feeling growing embarrassment and excitement from what had happened, not knowing how to react to his condition and what would happen next, because her actions were clearly unexpected for both of them. A familiar blonde guy towered over her, clutching his head and squinting as if trying to understand what was going on, and his face looked surprised, but at the same time slightly familiar, despite his tiredness and expression of great anxiety. The blond man with blue eyes and a scar under his eye, dressed in a simple shirt, studied her with his eyes, but although he clearly felt some surprise, his expression said that he did not recognize her, as if she was someone completely new to him, and this puzzled him. Monica stared at the man in surprise. her large green eyes expressing confusion and slight embarrassment as she tried to figure out what was happening, feeling confused by the strange reaction, not understanding why he was looking at her like that, as if she didn't recognize him. When she mentioned Louis's name, the tall man immediately became indignant, his face contorted with anger as if he absolutely did not want her to talk about this man, and there was a bright aggression in his voice as he shouted at her to shut up immediately. The lady realized that the guy did not understand what she was talking about, and she began to doubt what was happening even more, because he clearly smelled of alcohol, which only added to her anxiety, strengthening the feeling that something was clearly wrong with him, as if he was completely different. Sweet Orphan tried to remind him that 2 days ago he helped her get to the station when she was lost, hoping that he would remember, but his expression did not change and he did not answer, which only confirmed her fears and anxious thoughts. Louis said sharply and rudely that this scoundrel had once again spread all sorts of rumors about him, without mincing words and with obvious irritation, which only disappointed Monica even more, because this was not at all the version of the man she once remembered and admired. The beauty was shocked by the terrible way in which the previously polite gentleman had expressed himself, and her eyes, full of bewilderment, could not believe that in front of her stood the same man with whom she had once had pleasant conversations, and who was now so strange and alien. He rudely walked past the girl, abruptly declaring that he had nothing to do with this idiot, and did not want to talk to Lady Orphan, adding that her problems were none of his business, and he did not intend to waste his time on empty conversations with her and her stupid claims. The woman's purchased hat ended up on the ground in various dirt, all dirty, which only increased her feeling of irritation and confusion when she saw how valuable property was destroyed and dirty, causing her a storm of emotions, like her lost pride. Outraged by the damaged property, young Monica screamed at Louis to stop immediately, her voice sharp and alarmed, because she could not believe that this man was so insensitive and cruel, not noticing her feelings and difficult situation. She rushed after him, screaming for him to stop immediately, her loud feminine voice full of desperate determination, as if she couldn't let him leave without an explanation, feeling that all of this was unfair and her emotions were overwhelming her, not allowing her to calm down. She grabbed his strong hand with her own and squeezed it, trying to hold him in place so that he would not move further, feeling how her anger and worry were intertwined, and her nerves were on edge, and she could no longer hide the confusion and anger that was accumulating more and more. Louis rudely pulled his hand away, asking what she wanted from him, with irritation in his voice, as if her claims were empty and not worth his attention, and to which she, with a strong emphasis on her resentment, informed him that her things had been damaged precisely because of his indifference. Monica shouted loudly that her hat was worth as much as 60 coins, by the way, emphasizing the value of the lost item, and her words sounded with notes of indignation and dissatisfaction that her property was so devalued by this man. And now she was as soiled as the silk ribbon, her eyes sparkling with indignation as she saw everything she had taken such careful care of destroyed, and it seemed to her especially unfair in light of what was happening, leaving her with no hope of justification. She took a step forward, confident in her decision, and stood firmly on the path, not wanting to retreat. Her gaze was persistent, and her heart beat in the rhythm of nervous excitement, despite all the confidence in herself and her rightness, as if she was already ready to stand to the end. Orphan firmly said that she would not let him go, would not beg, but directly stated that she would not leave until he paid for the damaged property. Her words sounded decisive and merciless, like an order, leaving him with only one choice, but her inner unrest did not disappear. Clutching his head, the man said that she should someday turn to a guy named Louis, who, in his opinion, was responsible for her problems and could perhaps solve the money issues, but his voice was full of contempt and discontent, as if he no longer believed in the fairness of what was happening. But suddenly Monica grabbed the guy's hand tightly, refusing to let him go even a step. Her determination became even stronger. She felt her nervous tension increasing, and she could no longer let him just leave without accepting responsibility, as if she herself was going to all lengths for the sake of justice. This outraged him, and he shouted what she was doing, why she touched him. His voice was full of rage. He was shocked by her audacity, and his words sounded like an order for her to immediately let him go and stop bothering him, feeling how his patience was coming to an end. The girl, however, was stubborn and said that Louis should pay her for the damaged things, confidently holding his hand, not intending to let go. Her determination did not waver, and a spark of anger burned in her eyes, which added determination to her words, making her even more unshakable. Suddenly, a crowd of people appeared from behind in the alley and shouted for Garcia to return to them immediately to settle matters, their voices sounding furious and ominous, as if the very atmosphere was filled with tension and anticipation that something important and decisive was about to happen. These were angry, indignant townspeople screaming at the boy to give him back what he had stolen from them, their faces distorted with rage and their words sounding like a sentence, leaving him no chance to justify or explain his actions, and they were clearly ready for anything. When Orphan asked who these people were, the man sighed heavily and said that she had ruined everything again, his voice sounding tired, as if he had long been accustomed to such situations, and her intervention only made everything worse, making him feel even more uncomfortable. After that, Garcia pulled his hand out of her grip and walked away without looking back. Monica was outraged by such impudence on his part. She could not believe that he so easily brushed off her request and continued to move on, as if everything was according to his rules, as if she was nothing to him. The young man winked playfully at her and said with a grin that he hoped she would survive this meeting. His words sounded mocking, as if he didn't care about the situation at all, but only a light entertainment on his way, as if he was always used to such scenes. And then, with a smile on his face, he ran resolutely, trying to escape from the angry townspeople who were still shouting furiously, and from the girl he had so unexpectedly bumped into, leaving her with a feeling of bewilderment and rage in her soul, as if he thought that all problems could simply be ignored. Monica looked after him in shock, not understanding how this man could be such a scoundrel, cold and careless, how he could treat people so easily, as if they were just toys in his hands, having no respect for other people's feelings, and at the same time with such ease of confidence. The man with the pick and beard ran past the maiden and ordered his companions to run after him and catch up with the scoundrel. His voice sounded insistent and firm, as if he was ready for decisive action, not doubting his rightness and intentions, and his steps were confident and quick. With her hands folded in front of her, Monica prayed that she would not be touched and that they would pass by. Her feminine thoughts were restless, but she remained where she was, hoping that her quiet presence would not attract unnecessary attention and that this moment would soon end. But then she was grabbed by a tall man with dirty, stained hands and hair pulled back. His face was stern, and his voice was hard and demanding. He asked who she was with a sullen expression, showing no interest in her explanation, and his gaze was cold. The girl, excited and exclaiming, replied that she was just an ordinary passerby and nothing more. She tried to distance herself from the situation, explaining that she had nothing to do with what was happening, hoping that her words would be able to convince the man to let her go, but her heart was beating fast and her nerves were tense. But the man didn't believe her words and said that he saw her hugging another guy before he ran away. His eyes were full of doubts, and he couldn't believe that her intentions were pure, as his suspicions only grew stronger and doubts grew with every word. Monica protested, saying that Garcia had soiled and ruined her things, but her words sounded increasingly unconvincing as she was surrounded by such aggressive looks. The townsman responded with a question, demanding that she explain where exactly that Garcia had run off to, his face clearly expressing displeasure. Suddenly the boor grabbed her by the hair and in a mocking tone began to demand an answer, asking harsh questions about where the young man had run off to, who, according to him, had stolen a very expensive and important thing. He pulled her head back, not giving her the opportunity to escape and making her situation more and more dangerous. The men crowded around the poor girl, asking questions, and they all held her by the hair, being rude and threatening, as if she was the one to blame for everything that was happening, leaving her no chance to defend herself or justify herself, and their looks were full of anger and accusations, filling the air with tension. There was a hammer in the man's hand, and a threat was made that they could get rid of her in a terrible way. His voice was full of cruelty and his gaze was unyielding, which made the girl feel fear and cold despair growing in her chest. Her heart began to beat faster in fear for her life. With a wild grin, the man said that they could throw Orphan in a ditch where no one would find her again. His words were full of cynicism, and even in this terrible situation she felt her hope for salvation quickly fading, and her thoughts were confused in panic. Then, holding the lady by the throat, he raised the hammer, threatening her, clearly intending to strike if she did not answer his questions, and her eyes reflected rage and fear when she realized how dangerous the situation she was in was, and that her life depended on her every word. Monica was terrified. Her big eyes were full of shock. Her heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. Her head was spinning with thoughts of how she could have ended up in this situation, and the world around her became cold and lifeless, as if she was trapped. She sighed heavily, remembering Hans's words, who said that he would wait for her in the square, and this thought did not leave her, worrying and frightening her, because now she was not sure that she would be able to find him in time, and suddenly everything would be too late, and she would be left alone in this place. Lovely Monica was still thinking about how to escape, to hide from all this situation, but deep down she could not understand why she was so drawn to life, why she could not come to terms with the thought of death, which loomed nearby like an inevitable shadow. Suddenly, a strange voice was heard, and Monica turned back sharply, trying to catch the source of the sound, who it could be and what he wanted. At that moment, she felt how every muscle in her tensed, ready for any reaction, as if everything around was trying to collapse. It was a young blonde man who resolutely came back for her and, shouting loudly throughout the market, demanded that the townspeople pay attention to him, and this is how he managed to save Orphan, who was in mortal danger and needed him. Garcia, without wasting time, gave the men a firm order to immediately release the girl, because she had absolutely nothing to do with this matter, and at that moment he only needed him, the man who could help resolve this entire difficult and dangerous situation. The townspeople, hearing his stern command and noticing that he had returned, began to shout, discussing whether this was the same young man who had come to take the lady who had so unexpectedly fallen into his hands, and that he would now be able to return her safe and sound, saving her from harm. The stern man, without allowing himself to hesitate, shouted his order with absolute determination, demanding that the lady be returned to him immediately, making it clear that the situation required immediate action and the unconditional submission of everyone present at that moment. Monica screamed that even if this young man was not that guy named Louis, let him explain to the angry and aggressive townspeople that she was just an ordinary passerby, and everything that happened was just a random misunderstanding that had nothing to do with her personally and her life. Suddenly the girl froze, the female body was crushed, and the pain from hitting the wall was so strong that she could not breathe, pressed against the cold, unpleasant surface, feeling how her strength was decreasing with each passing moment, leaving her completely defenseless. Barely holding back her tears, she felt how strong and rough arms were squeezing around her, not giving her any freedom, not giving her a chance to even try to break free or find a way to free herself from their cruel grip and fight for her own survival in this dangerous situation. Garcia warned the men to let the lady go or he would not be held responsible for himself, but the men did not care at all and did not pay attention to his threats, since the only thing they cared about was getting back their precious thing and the goal that seemed to be the only thing that mattered to them. The young man fought with himself, trying to run towards them, screaming angrily and preparing to fight, despite his obvious danger and the rage that filled him, not allowing him to stop, and every step was for him a step on the verge of despair and desperate determination, as if everything was lost. Blurred shadows and unclear outlines surrounded Monica. She did not understand what was happening. Her vision was blurred and everything around her became distorted, like in a nightmare that could not be stopped or changed, and her thoughts were confused in the anxiety and confusion that was engulfing her. One of the men was shaking with anger, looking around at his colleagues who, in his opinion, were behaving like idiots, doing everything wrong and not understanding the seriousness of what was happening at this moment, which only worsened the situation and added to the chaos, not giving him peace. Orphan watched as the villain was overcome with anger and fear that his subordinates could be defeated by some boy, and it would undermine everything they were trying to achieve, making her doubt their ability to cope with the situation and survive in this cruel reality. She herself stuck her head out from behind his back to make sure his words were true and to try to understand what exactly was happening to this world, which was becoming increasingly dangerous and unpredictable, no matter how she tried to stay away from all the events. And indeed, the one who had previously threatened her so terribly lay motionless on the cold ground. His weapon was close by, but now it could not help him, and all he could do was lie limply, as if he had lost all strength, determination, and desire to continue the fight. Garcia was a real fighter. He kicked his opponent on the chin, and he turned back, completely off balance and unable to withstand such a powerful and accurate blow, which knocked him out in the first seconds of a brutal fight. After which his opponent, unable to resist, fell to the floor as a lifeless body, and his eyes showed no signs of life, only lifelessly looking at the surrounding space, while the young man stood next to him, with a cold and arrogant expression on his face. Tall Garcia, with a cold and arrogant look, turned to the other man and ordered him to immediately release his girlfriend, without losing the slightest doubt that he had the situation under complete control and would not allow anyone to interfere with him in this important matter. Already involuntarily, trembling from great fear, the great villain said that the boy would soon regret the theft, and although he tried to speak confidently, it was obvious that he was afraid of this guy, especially after what he had just seen in the brutal fight. Garcia looked at the man sullenly and said with heavy confidence in his voice that he would soon get what he deserved for all his vile deeds and vile actions, because his intentions were more than obvious and black as a deep night without stars. And after these words, he clenched his fist with fury and determination, and then, with a powerful and precise blow, sent the scoundrel straight into the street, and he, unable to stay on his feet, recoiled with great pain, falling with a dull sound, experiencing the iron justice of justice. The lovely lady suddenly shuddered from the sharp and furious blow, frightened and gasping loudly, seeing how her terrible offender was being beaten with such force and vicious determination, as if he was not a man at all, but a worthless creature who dared to offend a fragile and defenseless woman. The sweet girl screamed in unexpected pain as the heavy, limp body of the villain fell on top of her, pinning her to the cold ground and depriving her of breath, and thus she too received a blow, albeit unintentional but strong enough to cause suffering. Falling onto the cold, dusty ground, she whimpered in sharp pain. Her body trembled with small, convulsive tremors, and every, even the most insignificant movement, was responded to by a dull, spreading ache. It turned out to be almost impossible to get up, as if the earth itself held her captive. Garcia, sighing heavily and frowning slightly, looked down at her carefully with a noticeable worry in his eyes, and then asked, a little hesitantly but gently, if she was okay, because despite his severity, he was genuinely worried about her. Monica couldn't hold back. She burst into tears, breaking into helpless sobs, because everything inside her was squeezed with pain, fear, and humiliation, and the abrasions on her body and mental resentment poured out in streams of hot tears, flowing down her trembling cheeks like rain on a window pane. The young man, noticing this, seemed to be dumbfounded by the suddenness of what was happening. He froze, not knowing how to help her, how to react correctly, and what to say to at least console her a little, because guilt, helplessness, and the feeling that he had appeared too late were fighting in his chest. The lady cried even harder, because the realization that she had made a mistake again, taking this guy for a completely different person, was too painful, and in addition, she was attacked by real bandits. All this was like a real nightmare from which she wanted to wake up. Sitting down on one knee next to her, Garcia looked at her with a confused and worried expression on his face, after which he hesitantly, almost in a whisper, asked her a question. Why was she crying like that? What exactly caused such pain? What reason did her large tears hide? Suddenly he noticed how she reached out to him with a trembling hand, and he shuddered when he saw her palm. There were abrasions on it, deep scratches, terrible traces of blood and dirt. All this spoke of what she had to go through very recently in this merciless collision. He took her wounded hand carefully and tenderly, as if he was afraid to even touch it, so as not to increase her suffering, and with noticeable anxiety in his voice, pressing his lips together from internal tension, he softly asked if she was too badly hurt, hoping to hear words that would dispel his guilt and anxiety a little. Then, showing the care that he could not always express in words, he carefully helped her up from the cold ground, supporting her by the shoulders, and then, with sincere regret and a heavy sigh, asked for forgiveness for his previous behavior, admitting that it was because of his mistakes and carelessness that she was attacked. Monica, sobbing through pain, with trembling hands and labored breathing, barely rose to her trembling legs, wincing with every movement, as if every effort caused her suffering, as if her body itself resisted returning to this cruel reality. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the hem of her dress, and her heart sank painfully. The fabric was not only torn, but also stained with dirt and blood, irreparably ruined, and she had only a few outfits anyway, and the loss of even one seemed like a real, humiliating grief in her fragile situation. With annoyance, breaking into a scream and feeling the resentment growing in her chest, she abruptly pushed the guy away from her and loudly, almost breaking into hysterics, screamed, complaining that her only good dress was now ruined, torn, and completely unusable, and blaming everything that was happening around her for this. After the scream, from great excitement, she suddenly staggered, her legs buckled, and she almost fell again. But Garcia immediately stepped forward, worriedly extended his hands, and restrainedly but firmly asked her to be more careful, ready without hesitation to catch her at any moment if she could not hold on. Monica's raven-black hair began to slowly unravel from its braid, the silky shine locks gliding over her shoulders, emphasizing the grace of her neck and the femininity of her silhouette, as if the wind itself had decided to unbraid it, revealing her natural beauty. Monica was strikingly beautiful at that moment. With her hair loose, her large, expressive eyes of a rich emerald hue, and her delicate porcelain-like skin, she resembled a mythical heroine who had stepped out of the pages of an ancient legend, filled with light and anxiety. Garcia involuntarily froze, blushed to the tips of his ears, and was clearly embarrassed, looking away, because the beauty of his companion took him by surprise. There was something frighteningly attractive in this vulnerability and fragility, and he suddenly realized how much he cared about her. However, this moment was rudely interrupted. He flinched as if he had been doused with cold water, when Monica, with her head thrown up sharply and with fury in her eyes, ordered him, almost shouting the words with anger in her voice, to finally leave her alone and stop following her. The noblewoman accused him of ruining her dress with fury in her eyes, and it seemed that every word she said was saturated with malice, as if this incident were the greatest injustice, some kind of nightmare that she could not believe in, and desperately tried to understand how it could have happened. She had no qualms about accusing him right in the middle of a narrow alley, claiming that he had broken everything he could, first her favorite silly toy, then a thin ribbon, and now even her clothes, which she had chosen so carefully, emphasizing every moment to be in order. The young man, hearing these accusations, froze in place, his face darkened, and he, as if trying to hide in the shadows, did not know how to react correctly. Confusion and bewilderment engulfed him entirely, as if he found himself in the epicenter of an unfair accusation that was destroying their entire relationship. The maid listened to this entire conversation with increasing tension and horror, her face distorted with fear, and she became increasingly worried about her colleague, realizing that the situation was becoming more and more confusing and complicated, like an inexorable storm in which they all found themselves, not knowing how to get out. Monica returned to her mansion holding the hem of her dress, which was completely ruined. Her smile was tense and uncertain, as if she herself could not believe what had happened, and her face reflected obvious inner anxiety and bewilderment. The maid, noticing the guy whom Orphan had sent to help the lady, watched in surprise as he left her alone and quietly left, and her face reflected confusion and bewilderment, because she did not understand why he acted as if other people's problems did not concern him at all. The maid, having taken on an important and difficult task, decided to sew a dress for her friend, who, in turn, was sincerely grateful to the kind Marie for her care and patience, appreciating her skill and kindness, which, without a doubt, deserved attention and respect. The woman, looking at Orphan with slight concern and bewilderment, gently advised him to be more careful in their city, where there were many dangerous bandits and criminals ready for anything, because in such a place every step could lead to unexpected and very unpleasant consequences. Monica, walking slowly and reluctantly in her new blue dress, felt herself tormented by doubts and worries, because despite its refined beauty and comfort, she did not want to wear it in such heat, especially when she had no other suitable outfit. The hand, barely touching the large door, betrayed a slight tension and anxiety, and even without words there was a sense of wariness in the air that filled the room, as if the silence itself suggested that now it was important not to disturb the fragile moment that had arrived. Monica, without unnecessary words or movements, sat down in the next chair, listening attentively as the doctor continued to tell strange stories about how every time after the massage, the boy washed himself with dirt, which caused her bewilderment and a desire to understand everything that was happening. The doctor quickly, with his usual precision and experience, noted that Orphan's leg was seriously injured, and a white bandage was visible on it, which was carefully wrapped around the knee, as if trying to hide the traces of injury left as a result of a recent brutal fight. Monica, without unnecessary words or any unnecessary movements, sat down in the next chair, listening attentively as the doctor continued to tell strange stories about how every time after the massage, the boy washed himself with mud, which caused her some bewilderment and a desire to understand everything that was happening. The doctor quickly, with his usual precision and experience, noted that the leg of the sweet orphan was seriously injured. A white bandage was visible on it, which neatly wrapped around the knee, as if trying to hide the traces of injury left during a recent and brutal fight. The adult doctor, slowly and carefully approaching the girl, politely asked if he could examine her leg, and, having received her consent, she thanked him for his attention and patience, feeling grateful for his professionalism and kindness at this difficult moment. Opening his small suitcase, he took out a small bottle of bright red liquid that looked like it was meant for an important treatment and carefully poured a few drops onto the wound, carefully monitoring the girl's condition, preparing to continue her care. During their conversation, the man, showing interest in her life, asked if she had ever worked as a nurse, and she, after thinking for a moment, answered in the affirmative, telling him that in the past, on the battlefield, she had indeed had to work in a hospital, helping the victims. The man, with a slight regret in his voice, said that he also wanted to go to the front, but due to the lack of sufficient experience, he was immediately sent to the front lines, where he distributed green pills to everyone, which were used to maintain morale among other soldiers. These pills were a specific medicine for soldiers who were losing their minds and going mad from the horrors of war, so that they could continue to fight despite the mental exhaustion and internal torment that became necessary on the battlefield under such conditions. The doctor's experienced hands, with precision and care, carefully changed the girl's bandages, applying a new, soft, and clean one, which was supposed to provide the best treatment for the wound, preventing any complications and promoting rapid healing of damaged skin and tissue. The doctor, putting the old bandage on the table, continued his story about how in the war many could not withstand the psychological pressure and, unable to cope with the torment, shot themselves in order to escape the fear and madness that overwhelmed the soldiers in the most difficult moments. The girl took the used bandage, deciding that she would clean it herself, despite the doctor's attempts to offer help, because she did not want to leave traces of her wound. With this decision, she felt a little more confident in caring for her body and treating it with care. She herself thought that perhaps later she would decide to get rid of the remains of the white shirt that she had come across, because she was not able to throw them away now when everything was still so hard and the rough smell reminded her of unpleasant moments from a secret past. Shrugging his shoulders, the doctor suddenly added that the recipe for these green pills was also a request from a nurse from the very hospital where dear Monica once worked, and she left her mark on this medical practice, bringing her experience and many knowledge. With a smile, the girl, slightly surprised and a little wary, asked how she could be of use to the youngest son of the magnificent lady in medical terms, because she was curious to know how she could help, given her experience and knowledge in treating children. She began to listen attentively as the doctor explained that the boy needed regular walks in the fresh air, as well as light physical exercise, which could have a beneficial effect on his health, strengthen his body, and help him cope with his current condition. The new bandage was carefully tied on the knee of the noblewoman, and the skillful hands of the doctor, showing precision and attention to detail, carefully completed their work, adding a small bow to the bandage, which gave an aesthetic completeness to the treatment and care of the patient. The boy, given his poor health and frequent illnesses, should not have experienced excessive stress or subjected himself to stress, because for him, negative emotions and experiences were practically equal to poison, which worsened his health and slowed down the healing process. The doctor explained that bad emotions caused the boy to have severe attacks, and because of them, the boy's brain cells died, which could lead to irreversible consequences for his health and psyche if he did not start taking the necessary measures and long-term treatment in time. After this, he handed the woman a small red bottle of medicine, saying that it was a very important remedy that would need to be used with special care and attention. He emphasized that it could help in a critical situation if her son got worse. The doctor also warned that she should use this medicine when the boy gets injured or feels worse, as it will provide support and help him recover faster, relieving terrible pain and speeding up the healing process in the most difficult situations. After the door quietly slammed behind the doctor, the girl was left alone in silence and calm, feeling how the storm in her soul was dying down, and her thoughts were slowly beginning to come into order, as if for the first time she could truly relax and calmly think about everything. But it did not last long, for soon the youngest son of her mistress ran into the room with a smile and a restless step, not caring at all that the maids tried to stop him. He was so happy to see his teacher that he could not contain his emotions and flared up with joy. Martinel was genuinely happy to see his teacher and immediately began asking her a lot of questions, showing genuine concern, asking how she was feeling, how her leg was healing, what she had been doing, worrying about what could have happened to her health. With her hand behind her head, a little embarrassed, the lady tried to answer, quickly lying that she had injured her leg while walking in the fresh air, trying to avoid unnecessary questions by not revealing the true cause of her injury or going into detail about what had happened. After that, they said goodbye to the doctor and headed out of his office, walking together in silence, absorbed in the thought of how important it was to forget and relax for at least a little while after a busy day filled with worries and anxious conversations about health. Monica suggested that her ward go for a walk to unwind and refresh himself, relieve stress, and forget himself in the world around him, and he, with a slight smile, happily agreed, realizing that this would be a good opportunity to relax and spend time in her company. The garden that spread around them was full of colorful flowers, creating a picturesque picture where every corner was filled with the beauty and harmony of nature, which involuntarily attracted attention, creating a feeling of peace, tranquility, and comfort, as if it were a real paradise. Martinel, with obvious surprise and genuine interest, asked what the lady was talking about, to which she began to tell him with curiosity about the port that was nearby, evoking vivid, bright images of this place in his imagination, as if inviting him into a world of adventure and discovery. Monica replied with a smile and a slight laugh that she had once worked in the same pants as the boy was now wearing, showing how much had changed since then and how life could sometimes take unexpected turns, opening up new and exciting opportunities. Martinel said that he would like to visit this port, but Orphan, with a serious expression on his face, told him that this place was quite unsafe and that he should first grow up a little before going there, understanding all the possible risks and consequences for his health. Showing her knee, Monica replied that an adult uncle also stumbled there, just like him at the port, and tore his pants, so she considers this place dangerous and claims that one must be very careful to avoid serious injuries and unpleasant consequences. The lady, smiling, gently told the boy that, yes, that was the reason she had chosen the blue dress today, but promised that she would buy herself a new one soon, because her wardrobe really needed updating, and she always tried to be on trend and follow the latest fashion trends. The mansion was surrounded by a beautiful garden where flowers bloomed in full splendor, and the sky above it was clear, clean, and cloudless, as if creating an atmosphere of peace and tranquility, where time seemed to slow down, and everything around became fabulous and beautiful. The pair discussed the latest fashion news, exchanging a wealth of details about where which high society lady had dressed, what collections were currently trending, and which famous designers deserved the most attention this season and why. Miss Violet was a 14-year-old girl with red hair. Her beauty was unsurpassed, and the braid in her hair added a special charm to her image. She wore an elegant dress, and, of course, the boy liked her very much, who admired her every move. He thought she was smart and couldn't help but admire her image. He often found himself in the clouds thinking about her, and even imagined hearts surrounding his thoughts when he remembered her, or thought about her soft look and gentle smile, which brought him into great delight. Monica, noticing the boy's love, only laughed, watching him. He looked really cute, slightly embarrassed, but at the same time sincere in his feelings, which only added to his charm, and she could not help but notice his sincerity, touched by this. Squeezing their fingers, they promised each other that his little secret would remain between them and would never go beyond the confines of their confidential communication, in which they could be themselves, not be afraid of judgment, and remain real with each other, because this was important for both of them. Suddenly, the young man started talking about his sister, asking if she would return home when she got married, to which young Monica replied that she would be sad, because that moment would inevitably bring changes in her life, and she would miss home and her family. Martinel, immersed in his dreams, suddenly began to tell that when he grows up, he will marry his beloved secretly, and they will live happily, raising 2 children. And in their garden he will plant her favorite blue flowers so that she will always feel his care and attention, despite the difficulties. After that, he said that his family, as nobles, did not treat them very well, but he hoped that they would eventually allow him to marry Sweet Violet, because despite all the difficulties, he was ready to fight for his happiness and love, no matter what. Previously, Liella spoke dreamily about how she would like to marry a beautiful lord who, in her opinion, could truly catch her and make her happy, because she always imagined herself next to such a person in an ideal relationship. The lady walked forward confidently, mentally imagining a picture where she and her future husband would be happy and full of mutual understanding, and her life would be filled with harmony and satisfaction, because with him, as she believed, she could become truly happy and peaceful. The nanny walked behind the boy, carefully watching his steps, and he, noticing something in front of him, suddenly froze in surprise when he saw something unusual and interesting in front of him, which immediately attracted his attention and aroused genuine curiosity and a desire to explore. Sweet Monica also could not look away, carefully examining everything that caught her eye, attentively and intently, because a new world was opening up before her, which she could not help but explore, since everything here was interesting to her and made her think. The skillful hands of the gardener carefully collected red roses into a basket, carefully cutting each flower head to preserve their freshness and beauty for further use, creating an incredible atmosphere of well-groomedness and harmony in the garden, filling the air with their aroma. Liella stood in an elegant dress and with an exquisite hat on her head, cutting roses with the gardener, enjoying the process and the contact with nature, imbued with every movement, as if she herself became part of this living corner, absorbed in beauty. Slowly and gracefully she turned, directing her gaze in the direction from which she was being called, for she felt that this was an important moment when her attention would be directed to something new, and she had to be ready to respond to this call so as not to miss anything important. The girl smiled at her relative, holding a beautiful rose in her hand, which gave her even more charm. Her white dress seemed to emphasize her natural beauty and grace, and her gaze was full of warmth and light, like a ray of light among the shadows. The boy waved cheerfully at his sister, and Monica stood nearby, calmly waiting for the situation to develop, feeling a little nervous, but remaining observant and attentive to what was happening around her, trying not to interfere so as not to disrupt the moment. When he suddenly gave the lady a rude hug, she gently warned him to be careful, as it was easy to lose balance and fall in that position, and she didn't want him to get hurt, reminding him of the importance of safety and paying attention to his body. Martinel, in turn, gave her an air kiss, thereby expressing his love and affection, because he really liked her, and at that moment he wanted to show how important this girl was to him, although he was embarrassed to talk about it directly, but the feelings were sincere. Monica, on the other hand, watched the sweet scene with a smile and a slight admiration on her face, noticing how sweet and sincere they both were in their feelings, which gave her a feeling of joy and lightness, watching such a touching moment that was full of invisible but tangible closeness. As Liella suddenly noticed them and turned her attention to them, young Orphan immediately bowed her head, greeting her elder mistress with respect, for she always knew how important it was to maintain due position and respect for elders, especially in such moments. When his sister asked him if he had walked with his teacher, the boy answered positively, with a slight smile, putting his hands behind his head, because for him it was an ordinary walk, full of ease and pleasant moments with his mentor, who always supported him. With a good-natured wink at Orphan, dear Martinel suggested that she go help another servant in another part of the house, to unwind a little and fulfill her duties as the eldest member of the family, always ready to help and be useful in any situation. So the two of them walked away, and Liella remained standing, watching them with her attentive eyes, as if trying to guess their thoughts. But she remained silent, absorbed in her own experiences, which remained hidden from others, despite her desire to understand everything. Her delicate hands gripped the scissors tightly, her fingers held them so tensely that it seemed that not a single detail could escape her attention. Everything was under complete control, and every movement with the scissors was performed with true confidence and incredible grace. The beautiful mansion with columns bathed in the golden rays of the setting sun created a truly magical atmosphere in which there was a sense of sophistication and wealth, attracting the eyes with its grandeur and carefully thought-out design, like a real work of art. The servants were busy with housework. The maids carried buckets, carefully cleaning and washing the floors, and the man, with unwavering determination, carried bags of various supplies, taking care of the preparation of the palace so that everything was ready for the important event, which had to go flawlessly. The beautiful aristocrat firmly ordered the rest of the servants to hurry up and complete all the preparations for the upcoming banquet. Her voice was firm as stone, and even those who were usually in no hurry submitted to her demands with obedience, striving to complete everything on time. After all this, she apologized to the kind Orphan, expressing regret that Martinel had tired her out so much, and she had to help others, fulfilling his request, although she understood that her help was needed and important for everyone who was busy preparing the holiday and all the guests. It is said that at one of these banquets the lady met Violet's mother, and then they had a pleasant conversation, discussing various matters and important questions that concerned both of them, with respect and mutual interest, enjoying the conversation in complete harmony, like two old acquaintances. At the same time, Martinel fell in love with a young girl with red hair who was only a couple of years older than him, and her innocent look and elegant manner attracted his attention, making his heart beat faster with excitement, which was a new feeling for him. The mother, with slight severity, told her son that he should have asked his sister for help, and not the teacher, because help from relatives was always preferable and more important, to which he, a little embarrassed, replied that his relative had started teasing him. Dear Monica, watching this conversation, couldn't help but laugh awkwardly, standing aside, because the situation looked quite funny, and she felt how the little tension in the air disappeared, replaced by a light and relaxed atmosphere. The woman grabbed her son by the shoulders and sternly said that he should not have deceived her like that, but Martinel began to resist, trying to break free from her hands, not believing her words and protesting that no one should punish him without apparent reason, because he did not deserve it. The boy was all red, Embarrassed, his cheeks were burning with shame, and he could not hide his excitement, feeling the blood rush to his face when the kind mother spoke to him so sternly, and he suddenly realized how ridiculous everything looked in her eyes, despite his intentions. Immediately he remembered the doctor's words about how bad emotions could have a detrimental effect on a boy's health, and young Martinel realized that his behavior could really be causing his mother concern, especially after the recent warnings and advice she had given him. The noblewoman shook her head from side to side and sighed heavily, realizing that her son was completely disobedient, and his stubbornness was becoming more and more obvious, and she needed to find a way to deal with this in order to prevent more serious problems in the future. Therefore, the lady suggested that Monica accompany the young man to the banquet so that he would feel more relaxed, and the atmosphere around him would be more relaxed and friendly, to which she agreed, understanding the importance of this step for his psycho-emotional state and well-being. Orphan warned that, unfortunately, she did not have a suitable dress for such an occasion, to which the lady waved her hand, assuring that she could borrow one of her eldest daughter's dresses, because there was always something suitable for such occasions in the wardrobe, and it would not be difficult. Monica was a little embarrassed by this answer because she didn't really want to use other people's things, especially when she felt uncomfortable in this situation, but she still accepted the offer, realizing that she shouldn't refuse. The room they were in was decorated with soft light, and the windows led to the courtyard, from which a large space with green plantings was visible, and on the windowsill stood an old chest in which things and decorations were kept, testifying to the wealth of the house. Orphan stood next to the head maid, and together they began to select one of the dresses that had not yet been worn for the upcoming event, deciding that it would be the best choice for such an important occasion as the banquet they were going to, as the dress had to fit perfectly. Liella was sitting on the bed at this time in her green dress, calmly watching what was happening and carefully adjusting her hair, immersed in her thoughts and, it seemed, not noticing how closely they were watching her. Her eyes reflected a slight fatigue, but she still looked incredibly graceful. Suddenly the maid, noticing the younger mistress in the room, tried to hide, since she should not be there, because it was disturbing the order. And she felt awkward because her presence was noticed, her steps became hasty, and her face turned a little red from embarrassment. The lady, hearing the maid's remark, replied that she had not yet decided what she would wear to the banquet, but the maid, a little embarrassed, reminded her that an expensive dress had been custom-made for her, which was ideal for such an occasion. Liella thought about it, imagining how she would look in this outfit among the guests. Sweet Liella replied irritably that they could come later, as she had not yet made a final decision about the dress. In fact, she simply did not want to give her outfit to Orphan, postponing the final choice and leaving everything for later, as always. The elderly maid rose with difficulty and, stuttering a little, announced that she would come later in the day, as she had some business to complete, and then would return to continue her duties with the mistress, as had been previously arranged. Beautiful Liella waved her hand towards the maid, asking her to bring her some tea, and said tiredly that she had a busy schedule today, so Monica should look for a new dress elsewhere, since she would not be able to help with this issue today. So the maid and the kind nanny, without a word, left without receiving the dress, and without waiting for a final decision, they left the mistress, leaving her to ponder how best to proceed with the choice of attire for such an important event in her life that was approaching. Turning to Orphan, Liella noted that she did not seem picky about clothes, but it was still worth finding a dress that would look decent on her at the upcoming celebration, so as not to lose face in front of the guests and not cause unnecessary questions and discontent. After this, the woman boldly added that it would be worth telling about what happened to the elder lady, because otherwise Liella would never give them the dress, leaving everyone in uncertainty and dissatisfaction, which could lead to unpleasant consequences. Monica sighed heavily, forcing a smile, not knowing how to answer, because the situation was too complicated, and she could not immediately find the right words to justify herself or explain her actions in this difficult moment, which was dragging on more and more. They had a conversation earlier, and it didn't seem like Lizzie was in a good mood towards her. On the contrary, everything indicated that she was in a bad mood and clearly wasn't going to share any of her clothes with her, which made Monica very upset and worried. And then young Martinel, who said that, unfortunately, his sister did not like to walk with him, leaving her wondering why he thought so, and what was the reason for his rudeness, which obviously upset the sweet girl, making her think about it even more. Monica, with interest and a little surprise, asked the boy why he thought that, and the boy winced, realizing that he had said it out loud, realizing that he had opened up more than he had planned, and now he didn't know how to fix such an awkward situation with him so as not to ruin everything. Covering his mouth with his hands, the handsome Martinel quickly corrected himself and said that it was a secret, but Orphan quickly arrived to calm him down, assuring him that she would not tell anyone and everything would remain between them as something that never happened at all without disturbing their peace. It turned out that his sister's help had once done a disservice, and now Martinel was worried every time he talked to her, trying to understand what could have caused such a breakup that was making their relationship difficult and leaving him with emptiness, anxiety, and regret. The white, spacious corridor, decorated with columns, created an atmosphere of grandeur and luxury, but at that moment, everything seemed insignificant compared to the inner experiences that tormented his heart and did not give him peace, forcing him to think about the past and his mistakes. The headmaid walked forward, and Monica stood behind, lost in her thoughts, her hands folded in front of her, trying to find answers to the questions that haunted her like an echo in her head, forever repeating the same thought about what had happened in their lives. After which she walked outside, heading towards the gate, wondering why Martinel blamed himself for the breakup with his sister and what could have been the cause of his internal struggle that left a deep mark on their family and life, like a wound that does not heal for a long time. The lady walked forward, holding the suitcase with determination and firmness in her steps, and in front of her stood Liella, in exquisite lace gloves, with an air that spoke of her high position and self-confidence, as if she were ready for any test, not noticing those who were around. Lizzie had everything: money, luxurious dresses, outfits, jewelry, and a good life, full of servants and prosperity, while her position in society seemed immutable and there was nothing that could shake her. But behind all this external ideality, her inner coldness was hidden. While Monica herself had only her job and nothing more than a suitcase in her hands, feeling guilty for giving up her place to an old friend, thus putting herself in a difficult situation where every decision she made was important and burdensome, like a heavy weight on her shoulders. In addition to everything, the fountain, where the water flowed from above, created a feeling of lightness and peace, but only on the outside, because in the soul of the beautiful girl, various emotions raged that could not be simply quenched, and every step she took echoed in her heart. Monica lowered her head and realized that she had made her own choice, choosing a brooch over her family, and now this decision was making itself felt like a heavy burden that could not be thrown off her shoulders, leaving a heavy feeling of loss, regret, and irreversibility, like a scar that would not heal. Orphan slapped herself on the cheeks, as if trying to bring herself back to reality, and firmly ordered to pull herself together, not to waste time on pity, because there were important things ahead, and it was worth acting and not getting stuck in the past, which can no longer be returned and which cannot be corrected, leaving only lessons. After that, she looked up stubbornly, with determination in her eyes, and, without giving room for doubt, said that everything would be fine. She confidently added that she needed to pull herself together and be strong, and a slight smile appeared on her face, which hid her worries, fears, and unspoken words. She thought that maybe it wasn't that bad, because she had made the right choice, unlike her old friend who was already preparing for the banquet, but Orphan had more time to focus on more important things and not worry about the little things. Later, looking at the clock tower, Monica realized that it was time to get back to business and stop wasting time thinking about the past. She focused on the goal and felt how her inner world became collected and determined again, which gave her confidence in her abilities. As soon as she took a step forward, she suddenly turned around sharply, hearing a voice that called her from behind, and, turning around, she froze in shock, not believing her eyes, since it was Louis, her old acquaintance, whom she absolutely did not expect to see at this moment. It was Louis, a blond man in a beige suit with an impeccable appearance and a charming smile, and he met her with that special light in his eyes, like a true gentleman, leaving a storm of emotions in her soul that she could not suppress, but still smiled. The lady raised her head, trying to figure out if he was the guy she had dated before. And suddenly her gaze met his, and memories began to surface in her mind, making her heart beat faster, as if the passing years had not erased the great feelings. The young man kissed her palm tenderly, smiling and saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and asked how she was doing, while his voice sounded so warm that Monica felt her face turn red and her eyes open in surprise and slight confusion. Monica blushed embarrassedly from his unexpected gesture and opened her eyes wide, unable to hide her surprise, because this moment was so unexpected that she could not even immediately find the right words, feeling how her heart began to beat wildly. The young man nodded and said that Garcia had sent him to the meeting in his place due to some circumstances. A slight smile appeared on his face, as if he himself had not expected to find himself in such a situation, and was trying to soften the atmosphere a little, hoping that his words would not be perceived as overly formal. After Louis added that he didn't know that his friend knew such a beautiful lady like her, and now, having met her, he realized that their paths crossed for a reason, which surprised him, but at the same time made him feel a certain excitement, which he didn't expect at all, and this made the meeting even more interesting. The young man nodded and said that Garcia had sent him to the meeting in his place due to some circumstances. A slight smile appeared on his face, as if he himself had not expected such a turn of events, and was now trying to smooth out the tension that had arisen in their long conversation. Afterwards, handsome Louis added that he didn't know that his friend knew such a beautiful lady like her, and upon meeting her, he realized that their paths crossed for a reason, which surprised him, but at the same time made him feel something more than just curiosity. People living in the city moved slowly about their business, crossing streets and courtyards, immersed in the daily bustle, each in his own world, but at the same time forming an inseparable part of this huge mechanism of city life, where every step was part of the overall picture. The doves, spreading their wings, quickly soared into the air, and at that moment a sharp, piercing cry was heard from the girl, who was clearly stunned and shocked by the guy's words, spoken with such cold straightforwardness that it instantly aroused anger in her. The plan that Garcia conveyed to his companion was to address the girl as you, while not only did he not hide his rudeness, but also did not describe her culturally enough, which caused Orphan to be furiously indignant, forcing her to think about what to do with this impudence. Monica, clenching her fist until it hurt, held it tightly, as if promising herself that the next moment she would definitely give back, unable to resist harshly responding to the rude behavior of her acquaintance, who had long ago crossed all boundaries and ceased to understand what respect is. Suddenly, the sweet lady said that in any case, Louis had come instead of that impudent boor, and this was shocking news that shook everyone who witnessed the events, because no one expected such a turn of events, and even more so such an unexpected appearance that changed the course of the whole situation. The man, raising his eyebrows in surprise, looked at her in bewilderment when the lady suggested that he switch to the informal you instead of the usual you, which of course caused him a feeling of bewilderment because he certainly did not expect this and did not know how to react, losing the ability to contain his confusion. Tragically waving his hand and frightening the sweet lady, he suddenly exclaimed that, well, he would buy her a new hat and ribbon because, in his opinion, she was quite worthy of this sign of attention and a little luxury, trying to somehow make up for his rudeness. With a marked expression on her face and noticeable despondency in her voice, Monica said that if he continued to treat her like that, she would turn around and leave, showing that she would not tolerate such empty and rude gestures, and would definitely take care of her dignity, not giving in to manipulation. The young man, in her opinion, showed off too much, to which he replied that he was simply trying to please her, hoping that his attention would not go unnoticed, and that his attempts might possibly arouse her interest, but he was not sure whether he would succeed. The yellow brick clothing stores beckoned, displaying luxurious dresses for noble ladies in their windows, inviting them to experience true elegance, available only to a select few, and to immerse themselves in a world of fashion and sophisticated style, where each outfit promised to become a work of art. Upset and surprised, Monica noted that there were expensive dresses there, and the store itself gave the impression of a place where every item was exquisite and cost a fortune, to which Louis brushed it off, saying that for him it was not a problem, because money did not matter, and the real pleasure was in something else. Inside, in a bright shop, a lovely saleswoman in a silk dress and apron greeted guests with a smile and an elegant wave of her hand, as if inviting them to plunge into a world of stylish clothes and taste, creating an atmosphere of coziness and sophistication where every detail was reminiscent of splendor. Monica suddenly shuddered when Louis insisted that she choose a suitable dress for herself, which was unexpected for her because she was not used to such proposals, especially from such a self-confident young man who so decisively took on the role of her advisor. Moreover, he winked at her, giving her a cute nickname that meant "my love," which made her heart beat faster for a moment, and she felt some tenderness that she had not previously perceived as important, and she could not understand why this gesture touched her so much. The saleswoman, hearing the guy's words, happily offered to show the best dresses for the lady, confidently smiling at the customers and inviting them to follow her, as if confident in her choice and that she would be able to please her customers, not doubting that she would find something perfect for her. Quietly, with slight embarrassment, Monica whispered to the young man that all the dresses here were beyond her means, too expensive, because before she always shopped at the market, where she could afford much more than here, in this luxurious store, and she could not believe that her situation could change. Blushing, she whispered angrily that she was used to buying things cheaper and could not accept such an expensive gift from him, because for her it was something too big and inappropriate. She felt that it was not her level, and she could not understand how he could decide on such a gesture. The man, noticing her reaction, suddenly remarked that Garcia must have been rude to her, and this thought immediately made the lady shudder from the reminder that her relationship with this man could be much more complicated than she had assumed, and it hurt her a little because she had not expected such words. Louis, in turn, waving his hand tragically, said that he immediately understood that his friend had communicated poorly with her, and his manner of behavior surprised him greatly, which could not help but make Orphan laugh, forcing him to truly come to terms with the situation, because he was sure that it was worth fixing what could cause inconvenience. The guy, seeing her embarrassment, humbly asked the lady for forgiveness for the actions of his old friend, trying to correct everything that could be misunderstood and realizing that this was not only his responsibility, but also part of how he perceived her at that moment. Suddenly, Monica, as if remembering something important, turned to her companion and asked with a serious look who Garcia really was to him, and the young man, after thinking a little, answered that perhaps he was like a twin brother to him, somewhat similar but still not quite the same. Frowning and looking at the young man with restraint, Monica asked him in a stern tone to refrain from using the affectionate nickname for her in the future, explaining that she found it too familiar, too intrusive, and did not at all evoke pleasant, warm feelings. The guy politely promised not to address her that way again, but, with a barely noticeable smile and a slight mockery in his voice, he still could not resist and directly, without any hints, called the sweet and kind girl his great love, which made her blush deeply and lower her eyes. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted when the saleswoman approached them and, smiling politely, asked what styles of dresses they liked best, whether they had any particular preferences among the models on offer, and what color of fabric they particularly liked. The young man, without losing his mischievous mood and with a mischievous sparkle in his eyes, replied that they needed a beautiful, elegant, and comfortable, but at the same time tight enough dress so that Monica would definitely not be able to slip away from him again, thereby continuing his flirtation, from which Orphan noticeably blushed and became embarrassed, biting her lip. The saleswoman, having caught the intonations of their conversational game and with a smile full of sincere understanding, with slight grace pointed to the models of dresses that ideally matched those playfully voiced criteria that the guy had set, not hiding her slight approval and warm gaze. Among the assortment on offer were two spectacular dresses. One was golden with a subtle shine that shimmered in the light, and the other was the color of frost, as if woven from winter air, with elegant jewelry, luxurious trim, and thin, almost weightless lace along the edges. Next to them hung three other dresses that Monica herself had liked from the very beginning. Simple, discreet, modest in their palette, made in dark gray tones without any decorations or patterns, but it was precisely in their restraint that they seemed especially cozy and familiar to her. Sweet Monica calmly extended her hand to one of the simple dresses, devoid of precious jewelry and pretentious trim, and after thinking a little, softly said that it was this one that she really liked, because there was something special and familiar in its restraint. However, hearing the young man mockingly remark that in this dress she would look like a gray mouse among bright colors, the girl immediately flared up and, with an offended voice, objected, declaring that it was quite nice, comfortable, and did not seem to her to be plain or inappropriate. As an alternative and seeking to find a compromise, the man offered her another model, an elegant dress in a soft beige color with sophisticated green inserts and exquisite decorations, made in accordance with the latest fashion trends. Handsome Louis came closer with a slight smile, put the chosen outfit to the girl's figure, squinted, assessing, and with slight insistence declared that it would suit her perfectly, because in it she would look amazing, like a heroine from an old fairy tale. The guy with slight impatience suggested that Monica just try on the dress, but she resolutely rejected his offer, stating that she always preferred calmer, neutral shades and bright ones. In turn, always embarrassed her and sometimes deprived her of confidence, creating a feeling of unnaturalness. Then, suddenly, unexpectedly and quietly, Louis whispered words in her ear, full of such confidence that Monica held her breath for a moment and then felt her face turn pink from the unexpected feeling of warmth and care that she could not help but notice in his voice. Louis placed his hands on her shoulders, confidently and softly, as if to make it clear that he was always there and ready to support her, and with slight insistence asked her to open her eyes and look closely at the reflection, assuring her that she would certainly see how perfectly this dress suited her figure, emphasizing her beauty. The lady, finally giving in to his confident words, carefully opened her eyes and, seeing her reflection in the mirror, froze in surprise, not believing her eyes, because what she saw was so unexpected and delightful that her heart stopped for a moment. Previously, she often thought that bright colors like green did not suit her type of appearance, but now, looking at herself in the mirror, she realized that the dress really suited her perfectly, as if it was specially created to highlight her natural beauty. Monica, feeling slightly embarrassed, blushed, but at the same time felt her heart filling with pleasant excitement. In this dress she looked not only good, but also confident, as if she had discovered a completely new image for herself, which previously seemed unattainable to her. Louis, noticing her reaction, could not resist complimenting her, noting with sincere admiration that this dress would perfectly suit her black as night hair and bright, almost magical emerald eyes, creating an amazing contrast and emphasizing her mysterious and unique beauty. Finally, young Monica, nodding slightly embarrassedly, agreed to try on the outfit, and a light blush blossomed on her cheeks, giving the woman's face an unusual warmth and charm. She felt a little insecure, but was ready to go forward and trust his opinion. The young man with a smile on his lips turned decisively and, looking at the saleswoman, announced that they had made their choice, which meant they were ready to buy this dress, confidently declaring that they were now ready to take it with them and complete the purchase. He looked pleased with the result. With a sly grin on her face, the lovely woman noted with mild interest that the couple looked really beautiful together, and, without hiding her curiosity, asked if they were married, since they looked so harmonious together, causing slight bewilderment in both of them. Louis, with a slight smile on his plump lips, replied that not yet, and that he had only recently come off the ship onto land. His voice sounded as if he was still experiencing all the events that had happened before, and he watched with interest the reaction of the sweet Monica, smiling a little. The beautiful lady listened to his story with surprise and admiration. Her attention was completely captured by his words about how he used to be a doctor on a ship, because she did not expect that the man standing next to her could have such an unusual and exciting past life, full of adventures. Suddenly, a strong male hand fell on her shoulder and squeezed it with such force that the lovely Monica did not even have time to react, feeling how the female body involuntarily tensed from the unexpected touch, which made her heart beat faster. It was Louis who insistently suggested that the lady choose and try on a few more outfits, assuring her that her choice was not complete and that she would certainly find something even more suitable for herself, to look even more impeccable and stylish, feeling truly magnificent. The small cafe, located in the center of the city, was full of life, while the nobles, hurrying about their important business, passed by, busy with endless worries and duties, completely oblivious to those around them, absorbed in their thoughts and conversations. Several large boxes of already selected clothes stood on the shelves, neatly folded and marked as purchased, waiting to be picked up, ready to become part of the future look that was to be created for the client who came to the store looking for something special. On the table, in the cozy silence, stood a teapot with hot tea, from which steam rose, and next to it, temptingly located, lay a plate with soft, freshly baked cookies, which emitted an aroma that beckoned to itself. The scene filled the space with an atmosphere of peace. The sweet girl sat there, looking displeased, her brows furrowed and her lips pursed, as if she was not happy with what was happening, and her thoughts were clearly not in line with what was happening around her, which made her even more wary, as if she could not find her place in this situation. Louis, on the contrary, had a light, almost mysterious smile on his face, his eyes sparkling as if everything that was happening was giving him real pleasure, and he was in a good mood, clearly enjoying the moment despite the fact that Monica did not look too happy. Annoyed, the lovely lady pointed her finger at the boxes and asked what was in them, and the guy answered with a slight grin that the boxes contained her dress, because he had bought them especially for her, and could not resist deciding to give her such an unexpected surprise. Monica clutched her head, thinking that in her entire life she would hardly be able to pay off all the dresses she had bought in a fit of emotion, and a feeling of anxiety did not leave her, as if all this was an unbearable burden that she could not bear. Despite the young man's words that she was not obliged to pay him for these wonderful dresses, she still felt that she was somehow connected with this debt, and her conscience pushed her to the thought that she must fulfill the promise, even if it was only in her vast imagination. Raising his hands, the grown man suddenly explained his situation and apologized, explaining that he grew up in a family with 3 older sisters, and as a child until the age of 6, he considered himself a girl, because his sisters often dressed him in dresses and played various games with him, which became an important memory for him. Dear Monica thought it was rather cute to imagine little Louis in a pink dress, and while the thought amused her, she couldn't help but wonder what it must have been like in childhood when such moments seem even more innocent and touching. The weather was good, the warm rays of the bright sun penetrated the trees, and the houses seemed to be filled with an atmosphere of peace and comfort, creating harmony that no one wanted to disturb with a single word or action. At that moment, time seemed to stop, filling everything around with a special meaning. When the guy asked her what she did before, Orphan sheepishly answered that she earned a living. Her voice trembled a little, because this answer did not reflect the whole complexity of her life, but she still decided to share it, despite her shyness and embarrassment. The man, understanding her words, nodded, not judging her for her choice of inexpensive clothes. His gaze remained calm, and he did not express either surprise or condemnation, demonstrating complete acceptance of her style preferences, which caused Monica to feel comfortable and relieved. Looking into his teacup, he complimented her by noting that no matter what clothes a lady wore, she would still look beautiful and elegant, because her beauty did not depend on her appearance, but rather on her inner light, which made her smile a little shyly. After this, the lady curiously asked how Louis ended up being a doctor, to which he obediently replied that after the war he studied medicine and that it was an important part of his life, which he did not like to talk about too much, but it became obvious that for him this profession was more than just a job. The girl, surprised by his frankness, noticed that he was very similar to her, because she herself was also involved in medicine, and this became the moment that made her think about the intersection of their paths that connected them, opening up new horizons for communication and mutual understanding. With a slightly confused expression on her face, Orphan quietly said that she grew up in an orphanage, always dreamed of going to college and getting an education, but unfortunately her plans were not destined to come true, and this thought was painful for her. Louis had been looking at her the whole time with noticeable warmth and tenderness in his eyes, his attentive attitude to her every word leaving no doubt that he was truly, sincerely interested in her story and her experiences, which made Monica feel a little more comfortable. Noticing that his gaze did not leave her, Monica became a little embarrassed and, feeling inner tension, decided to open her soul, saying that she became interested in what exactly she had chosen and how she experienced these moments. Louis, with a playful grin, couldn't help but tease her a little and said that maybe she was thinking about marrying him, which confused Monica even more, but also made her heart fill with a warm feeling of tenderness and slight embarrassment. These words greatly embarrassed the lady, and she felt the desire to hit him on his beautiful face, but, unfortunately, her hands did not yield to her will, and she only felt a slight irritation that she could not express, although she was internally very outraged by what was happening. Suddenly, the man glanced at his watch in his hands and, with a slight regret in his voice, said that it was time for him to leave, despite his desire to spend more time with her, which made it clear to Monica that their meeting was coming to an end and she would have to come to terms with it. Looking at several boxes of groceries, handsome Louis noticed that Monica would have a hard time handling so many things, and a slight worry appeared on his face. He understood that she would not be able to carry it all by herself, and decided that it was worth helping her to avoid various inconveniences. Without thinking twice, Louis decided to call a carriage on the square, called the coachman, and confidently said that he would not leave her in this situation, deciding that help would be useful now and would save the lady from unnecessary troubles that could arise if she tried to cope with it herself. Orphan, feeling her anxiety growing, gave her address for all the boxes to be delivered to, not hiding her anxiety that they might be left without proper care. Her words sounded like a slight request, barely noticeable in the fleeting excitement, and she hoped that they would be delivered in time. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a strange situation, and she, turning her head in the direction Louis was looking, felt that something had happened that made him turn his gaze in that direction. It was something unclear, but important, like a premonition of a terrible disaster. Unexpectedly for her, the older boy grabbed her gentle hand with his strong hand, and Orphan's heart skipped a beat, feeling how his determination was transmitted into her own actions. She did not even have time to realize what was happening. Her thoughts were racing, and every moment seemed crucial. In the distance, the lady noticed a small group of noble ladies hurrying in an unknown direction, and unable to contain her curiosity, she asked what was going on. He, despite her questions, continued to move forward. His determination did not allow him to slow down, and the lady's anxiety only grew. They took refuge in a white opening made of beautiful marble, in the shadows, where their presence was almost not felt, and only the soft light penetrating through the columns created a special atmosphere, giving them the opportunity to feel relatively safe, hidden from prying eyes. In the distance, away from them, stood Liella, stepping out from behind the crack of the carriage, oblivious to those around her, waving goodbye to her friends with a bright smile, her face full of emotions, reflecting simple happiness, hiding hidden experiences behind it. The young couple, hiding in the distant shadows, watched with great excitement and curiosity as the carriage slowly drove away into the distant horizon, its wheels dully knocking on the stones, disappearing from sight, as if saying goodbye to this moment, which they decided to keep forever in their tender hearts. Monica, with slight surprise, began to realize that something was wrong when her gaze met her companion's eyes, and at that moment she felt an alarm signal awaken within her, as if something in his behavior had changed, and it was immediately noticeable. The same one seemed to be absorbed in deep thought. His face was absolutely serious and tense, without the usual lightness and smile that usually always adorned his expression. This unusual silence could not help but alert her, and she could not refrain from asking a question. Raising her head and confidently meeting his gaze, the beautiful Monica asked decisively what was bothering her so much. Was there some sadness hidden behind his cool demeanor, something that made him close himself off from those around him, not allowing anyone, including her, to see his true feelings? Clutching her head, the lady closed her eyes, feeling the growing anxiety taking hold of her, and quietly said that if his beloved suddenly decided to ask about her, let him say that they were just simple friends, nothing more, so as not to reveal anything unnecessary. Louis, hearing her words, laughed nervously, trying to hide his own embarrassment, and with a forced smile said that it seemed like she had caught him, making him feel a little awkward and confused, because he had not expected such a turn of events at all, which made him think about what would happen next. Orphan, feeling that there was no point in wasting time in this tense conversation, carefully folded her hands behind her back and firmly stated that perhaps it was time for her to go home, since the day had been quite eventful and there was no point in spending any more time. Monica turned her head, her gaze was soft and gentle, and her slight smile was given a mischievous touch when she, a little embarrassed, asked the young man if we would meet again, because she was really curious how all this would continue, and what awaited them in the future, what path they would have to go through together. Waving her hand towards the guy, she asked him with obvious irritation not to make stupid mistakes anymore, expressing dissatisfaction with his actions, which, in her opinion, did not correspond to his mind, and to be more careful next time, considering the importance of the situation and his behavior. She then asked him if Garcia was a member of a famous noble family, to which he replied that she had better ask the question herself, as he was not sure of the answer, and perhaps she could get more accurate information than he could give her without having all the necessary information. After this, he confidently turned to his companion, noting that it was better to ask questions of his acquaintance himself, and not of him, since this question went beyond his competence and direct knowledge, and might also require additional information and more detailed explanations. Monica, after thinking for a moment, nodded in understanding and did not argue with him, deciding that this time it was better to accept his words without unnecessary comments, leaving everything as it was, and continue the conversation in a calmer atmosphere, without delving into an argument in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts. After that, she walked away, absorbed by the crowd, moving away from the guy with quick steps, as if trying to forget about everything that happened and not wanting to deal with him anymore, not looking back and not noticing how her heart was speeding up from tension, as if every cell in her was trying to run faster. The man, standing still, watched her retreating figure with an attentive gaze, as if recording her every step, as if he wanted to remember every movement, hoping that one day, despite all the differences between them, their paths would cross again, and he would be able to change this situation, make it at least a little different. Then he took a step forward, his shoes barely touching the ground, as if in an attempt to get closer to her, but as if anticipating her detachment, he stopped, holding back the impulse so as not to destroy the calm that remained between them and return them to what they once called their past. Quietly, almost in a whisper, he said her name, adding that it would be better for her if they never met again, to avoid further disappointments and not waste time on empty talk, because everything that once connected them was now forever destroyed, leaving only emptiness between them. The large white mansion stood majestically, its walls seemed covered with many years of history, and the windows sparkled, reflecting the rays of the setting sun, creating an atmosphere of mystery and comfort around. There, inside, Orphan had already met a young guy named Hans, who looked at her with excitement and trepidation, not hiding his admiration because he was her admirer and wanted to show his help. He pointed to the large boxes standing in the other corner and said with slight regret that the other servants were busy with important matters, but he himself was unable to help her lift her things, which unfortunately did not fit up there. And after he scratched the back of his head, slightly embarrassed, He quietly apologized for the day when he couldn't help her at the market and left her alone, realizing how upset it might have been for her and how important his presence was to her.